Oh, good evening. I was just constructing a mobile for my living room. They tell me the four-in-hand is becoming less popular these days. I like it, though. I'm just old-fashioned, I guess. But so much for fine art. This evening we have another in our series of plays designed especially for insomniacs. Actually, our stories don't cure you of insomnia, but they do take your mind off your problem by stimulating your imagination and giving you something to think about as you lie there in the dark. Tonight's story will follow after we give this wakefulness test.
Welcome to the Shamley Silhouette, yet another analysis of the master of suspense, Alfred Hitchcock. I am your host, Zach Eastman. We are so close to the end, guys. So close, we can taste it. We can taste it, much like liverwurst at a lunch with Ingrid Bergman. We can taste it that close, that close. I want to thank last episode's guest, Ryan Frost, for sitting down for the third and final installment of his Shamley trilogy to talk about the films of Ingrid Bergman. We had a lot of fun reminiscing about Bergman and also talking about her exile from Hollywood and the injustice of that, and also touching a little bit about Hitchcock's first real obsessive tendencies towards an actress, and how that kind of blends into what would come later down the line. And once again, we are now down to about 5 episodes to go. You're going to be hearing some return voices from people like Phil Vecchio, who will be coming down to talk about Family Plot and The Farmer's Wife. You'll be hearing an episode on Alma Revel with our guest Olivia Carmel. And you'll also be hearing, for our final episode, the one and only Adam Roach from The Secret History of Hollywood, in an episode that I pre-recorded in March, because I didn't realize it would take me this long to get the series finished, because COVID threw in some wrenches in the cogs of our plans. So, but that doesn't mean I'm not able to go in like Charlie Chaplin and work those cogs until they start working again. So thus that's why we're ending as late as we are in the year. But on to today's show. So we have talked a lot about Hitchcock through different facets of his career, both in England and in America. We've tended to focus more on the American side of things, primarily because it was the best entry point to start off this series. Obviously, we talked plenty about Psycho, Vertigo, Rear Window, the Cary Grant collaborations, etc., etc. But not often were we going into the British era at the beginning of the series. As we've plugged along, we've managed to get a lot more of it in there. And unfortunately, it does seem like as we've been analyzing it, we've managed to also spend a lot of time talking about Hitchcock's earlier missteps, specifically with a close to 4-hour episode where we talked about 3 different films from the British period that weren't quite up to standard, but showed promise of what was to come down the line. But I thought it would be best to kind of wrap up the British side of Hitchcock's career, and specifically the involvement of one particular guest with a fun little romp called Young and Innocent from 1937. This is a film that is light on the heavier doses of suspense that Hitchcock would provide, and has proven to be one of Hitchcock's most British pictures. But it is still a fun and it seems kind of overlooked film, apart from one very famous sequence that would then later be perfected in a film called Notorious. And we will talk a lot about that and many other things as I welcome back the one and only Marshall Rosales.
Hey, y'all.
Wow. Did you think when you signed up to talk about Psycho a year ago that you'd still be fucking here?
Never in a million years did I think that I would be invited back 4 additional times to that. This has been such an amazing ride.
Well, and this is the part where you announce it. I'm leaving it in the middle of the episode. Goodbye. Come back. No, but I thank you for, taking the time that you have to watch all these films and to dissect them with me. We've had a lot of repeat guests over the course of the series. Some of the repeat guests that I've had, some of the most funs I've had have been with Ryan, with Aaron Pendergast, and with you. You three have been very involved in helping this show plug along as it has. Additionally, we've had people like Jack Hanley and Undead Matt from Punk Rock Horror Podcast who have come back to contribute further. But you guys have definitely been a heavy part of it, and I do thank you for coming down as often as you have, whether in person or virtually as of late, to talk about these films of the past that have seemed to have engaged a lot of response from people in various different forms. But
100% my pleasure.
Yeah.
I think that through this involvement with this amazing podcast, I think I've probably maybe seen like 5 or 6 times the number of Hitchcock's films than I did beforehand. So it's probably true to say that when I started a year ago, I was young and innocent of my Hitchcock exposure,
and now you have
so
vertigo.
It's only appropriate that this is our last film that we're covering.
You were young and
my
innocent.
Anyway.
Yeah, it's actually interesting that you bring up the term young and innocent when it comes to your relationship with Hitchcock prior to the podcast, because the title itself refers to the main characters being both young and innocent. It's a little. This movie's a little on the nose, but in a great way. I think I would argue in a great way.
I think it's on a nose. I'm not sure it's on the nose, because I think some aspects of it are a little tough to track and are a little skewed. But I would agree that it's on a nose.
Yeah,
I'm just not sure which one.
Well, we'll dive into it as we contemplate the legacy of the film, because it's a film that I do feel is respected mainly in film people circles, but it is not. It's not talked about as much compared to some other films that are a little bit more exciting or heavy on the thematic tone. But this is a nice, fun affair that arguably kind of like a To Catch a Thief to a certain respect is just a blast to watch in a certain respect, and just it's entertainment to kind of turn your brain off a little bit, which is always a fun time regardless. It's not like Number 17 where you have to not only shut your brain off but remove your brain completely. So
right.
But before we jump in, I did want to ask you, now that you are 5 episodes into this thing and you've reflected on this, as a film goer and a film lover and a filmmaker, as you've watched these different Hitchcock movies, what has been your biggest takeaway over the course of this year as you've kept coming back, in terms of whether it's Hitchcock's legacy or just the films we've been sitting down to watch?
I think that that's a phenomenal question. I have to tell you, Zach, I have found it extremely inspiring, especially, being able to focus on not only Hitchcock's early films, but also his quote unquote failures, as in the times that in the podcast we've recorded together.
Yep.
I think that a big takeaway that I have is that it is really, really important to strive to fail early. And that you can, in all of his films, it was relatively clear that Hitchcock had a vision and had a thing that he was going for, and either early in his career didn't exactly know how to articulate it to execute it, or didn't have the control that he would earn later to be able to execute it, or was working with people who had equal standing with him in terms of power or greater in some cases, and so therefore wasn't able to execute it. But regardless, he knew that he wanted to make a thing work, and so he knew that he had a thing that he wanted to make work, and so he would kind of take a swing at it again and again and again until you build years later to the films that are in all of the, Hitchcock's box sets and are the immediate films that everyone thinks of whenever you say Hitchcock.
Yeah.
So I think that really has been an interesting process for me to like sit down and watch Hitchcock movies that are not wholly enjoyable through, like, from start to finish, the same way that all of the early, my early exposure, my first exposure to Hitchcock was because I was watching his greats and the classics and things like that. So to be able to go back and kind of see that process in the early days was really kind of neat. And also just in some ways, like Hitchcock getting in the way of himself. I think that looking at comparing his early films to his later films, I think that his early films have a lot more of a sparkle in their eye in terms of the treatment of the humor. I find it's a little bit more like we're going to stop the movie to make a joke, and now we're going to continue the movie, and then we're going to stop the movie again to make a joke. And as he evolved as a filmmaker, he was able to make that transition much more smoothly, and then weave the humor into the character and the story as a part of just like the natural way that things played out, as opposed to being so blatantly, look, it's a joke, or look, it's a pratfall, or whatever it is. So
it's more blended into the story itself and works appropriately for the characters. Yeah,
and it really is. I mean, especially when you look at like the timeline of how long he made films, you really kind of get to see the whole, the 10,000 hours sort of taking form of like, oh yeah, so he was always a master and always had a vision. He just didn't have the hours under him for experience of actually being able to execute what he was wanting to do in a nuanced and precise way. But then when you look at him later on, it's like, oh, he's going for the same thing. It's just now he can do it relatively, effortless, or at least make it look effortless.
It's funny that you bring that up because there's a bunch of interviews, clips of interviews he did with Peter Bogdanovich, and on it, Peter Bogdanovich brought up the notion that there are critics who felt that his American work was never as good as his British work, and he, in Peter Bogdanovich's wonderful way, he said, to me, that sounds asinine. And then Hitchcock had agreed with him in this part of the interview to the respect that, like, he felt that he was able to learn more, and what he learned he had put into those American films. So, like, it's interesting for how much we laud the British period, and it does deserve to be lauded. With the many different films we've discussed, whether it's the 39 Steps, The Lady Vanishes, even into this film, which is again a little bit more lighter on its feet, or Sabotage, the infamous film where I killed that fucking kid. The tendency is to say, that these ones are more respectable, and the later American films are a little bit more popcorn fare, with a few that have risen to high art. Vertigo being the top example of that. But what's interesting as you research Hitchcock, everybody has their own opinion on what the classics are. There are consensus answers, but nobody has the same train of thought when it comes to what their favorite is, or why it's their favorite, or what the best period is. It's funny, like I'm a fan of more, and drawn a little bit more toward the later American period that starts in the 50s and goes into the 70s. And Ryan, as I've talked with him, he has been a more fan of the 40s, so that middle period where he's just coming off the boat to America and making films like Rebecca, Suspicion, Shadow of a Doubt, stuff like that. So it's interesting how not everybody has the same inclinations. Like, and I like the British period in a certain section of it, primarily with the sound films, with the exception of stuff like The Lodger, and I like Downfall a lot. as a film. It's a film that we haven't really talked about. We might do it in a supplements episode, but it's on the larger Criterion, and it's interesting. It's not really it's not strictly a suspense film, but it has a bunch of merit behind it in terms of watching how he was able to make even a simple story work. So there's no clear answer to any of it. Except, of course, that Topaz is the best of all of them that you've discussed. Isn't that correct, Marshall? It's
mm-hmm. Sure is. It's the best one.
You like Topaz? Yep. Admit it.
All 13 hours of it is his best. Yes,
exactly.
One.
It's the best miniseries of all time since John Adams, and it came out before John Adams.
How you get from the parking lot up to the 6th floor. That's the miniseries.
HBO should just take Topaz and just re-release it unedited completely as an assembly cut, and they can get another Emmy.
Exactly.
But we're not here to talk about Topaz, much to Marshall's delight. We're here to talk about Young and Innocent. Once again, from 1937, Young and Innocent is a film that, as described up front, is not heavy on the thematic, but what's interesting about the film is that it assembles not only what he's established up to this point in British cinema, but it's also assembling the some things that will come further down the line, whether it's through the visual schemes, different tropes that he would then perfect in the American period, and also further developing certain parts of the humor, and we'll definitely get into elements of that as we go along. But we'll get these credits right out of the way. Young and Innocent, directed by me, a young and innocent Alfred Hitchcock. Nothing had gone wrong yet. Produced by Edward Black for Gammo Film Company and distributed by General Film Distribution. And the reason I bring that up is that at this point Gammo British had ceased to become a production company and had ended up becoming strictly a distribution company, and Hitchcock went over to Gainsborough, and then this film was basically created by Gainsborough and Gammo Film Company. The Gainsborough and Gammo were cooperating companies, and the formation of Gainsborough by Michael Balkin in 1924 kind of sets the stage for Hitchcock's career initially in London. And Gainsborough ended up essentially cementing Hitchcock's legacy in a way that arguably the reason we know a lot of these earlier masterpieces is because Gainsborough had given him the freedom to do these early experiments like The Lodger, even though the release of that film proved contentious because there was a notion that it should never be released because they didn't think it was worth releasing. But Gammo was, as I said, it was a French subsidiary of French Gammo Film Company, and it became an independent of that parent company in 1922. And then basically at a certain point it ceases production at its initial studios at Islington or at Lime Grove, and then basically becomes a different thing. So like the companies are kind of tied up in all general directions, but at this time, as Hitchcock is moving over to Gainsborough to make this film, he brings along obviously Alma and his assistant Joe Harrison, and he brings over initially Charles Bennett. Charles Bennett, who was a frequent collaborator of Hitchcock's, had basically been offered a large sum of money by Universal to be lured away. And before he took that offer, he worked on basically fleshing out the story for what would become Young and Innocent. It's based on a novel called A Shilling for Candles by Josephine Tay. And it's the second...
Very loosely.
What was that? Very loosely, yes. And before we reason out why, it's the second... It's the second of 5 stories involving an inspector named Alan Grant. And the thing about this film is that Alan Grant... this inspector character, Alan Grant, is basically removed. because the whole novel is a whodunit that is basically centered around that Scotland Yard inspector, and the character he's not there in this movie because
he had to go to Isle Numbar.
Yeah, exactly. Isle of Nublar. Yes, exactly. He had to go with Ellie Sadler and Dr. Ian Malcolm to that crazy old man's island where everybody told him, Marshall, that was a bad fucking idea. And, of course, the old man didn't listen. He said, no, I'm going to make dinosaurs, and then I'm going to make Gandhi, and then I'm going to make Chaplin. This old man needs to be stopped. Somebody stop John Hammond. I know the actor's dead, but we still need to stop John Hammond. Actually, side tangent for a second. There was news of a mysterious egg that is purported to be millions of years old discovered. And my first reaction was to post a picture of Alan Grant and go, somewhere out there, a young Richard Attenborough gets inspired. Which followed with a fun conversation with my friend Rick, who does not listen to podcasts, but it basically led to another revelation of Dr. Ian Malcolm's shirtless scene in Jurassic Park.
Oh, beautiful.
But anyway, yeah, Alan Grant went to the Dino Land, and there was a storyline in this novel involving our lead characters in the movie that was initially a subplot, and then they basically just Hitchcock and Charles Bennett just went like, no, like this Alan Grant character is a bunch of nonsense. Like, he's better at scaring children at a dig site. These two are much more interesting for my purposes. And so basically the story is fleshed out to essentially be the story of these two, a young woman and an innocent man, trying to clear the innocent man's name. And I'll say that it's interesting how this film, despite it leaning on some more comedic and romantic elements, still manages to have its own little heft of suspense. It's, like I said, it's super light, but it's there. And it's using the same techniques and tropes that Hitchcock became known and famous for, not the least of which this movie is a MacGuffin dream, if you really want to think about it, because the MacGuffin is very, like, usually the MacGuffin in a Hitchcock movie is mentioned a lot, but not, like, so leaned into. In this one, the MacGuffin, which is a
raincoat?
Yeah, the rain. Well, it's not just the raincoat; it's the belt in the raincoat. It's the belt specifically.
I think we'll get into this as we discuss the plot more, but I think that the suspense is there on paper. Yeah. But I do not feel that it is there in terms of the atmosphere of the film, or like woven into the craft of the storytelling, and I actually found it extremely undercut by the comedy.
Which is very fair, because it does lean into the romance element of it, and therefore there is a lot spilling over in terms of the comedic to complement that. When it is suspenseful, there's an obvious point where it becomes suspenseful, I'd argue, and it's also involved in one of the more cinematic elements of the movie itself. But it would be best to also mention there's a bunch of production info on this film, not the least of which we have a cast of seemingly people that, for the most part, had not really would not go to work on with Hitchcock afterwards. But
actually, before you get to the cast, I just did want to touch on some other people that had a hand in the writing. Obviously Charles Bennett, you mentioned a lot of collaborations with Hitchcock, Man Who Knew Too Much, 39 Steps, Foreign Correspondent. And then also Edwin Greenwood was involved.
And Anthony Armstrong.
Yep, and actually this was Edwin Greenwood's last credit film. He died when he was 44, sadly. And then Anthony Armstrong, also involved in the story structure, it looks like. He didn't look like he went on to do much of prominence. He did do one episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, so they continue to work together at some point in the future.
Yeah. Well, Hitchcock would bring people back on more than one occasion. He even brought back Joseph Cotten after he called Under Capricorn Under Crappy Corn. So, which again is a very, very childish thing to do.
Yes.
But
and then also an interesting note, there's also Gerald Savory, I believe.
Yeah, he did dialogue touch on it. Yeah.
Dialogue. This was his first film credit. It looks like he had done some plays before this, but this was his first film credit. Yeah, which is kind of cool.
And with Edward Greenwood, with this being his last film, it'd be good to point into it is that he also was a very integral part of The Man Who Knew Too Much. He worked on a series of films up until obviously this is the last thing that he does, but he was also a director. Primarily of shorts, up until 1929 when 28 and 29 when he starts doing features, and it seems like I've talked about how as he gets towards the end he starts getting some of his best stuff out of it, and I still stand by this as being one of the best. But it's in a but it does different things. But it's still utilizing the talents of the people that he had worked with and gained trust with over the years in terms of the writers that he worked with, the technicians that he worked with, and Joan Harrison, who we haven't talked a lot about yet, apart from her being Hitchcock's assistant that would go on to be a producer. One of the things she was doing was supervising the script on this film, while Alma worked on continuity. So like she kind of helped shape this film as well. So this was actually kind of like a 5-writer job on this film between everybody involved, and in addition to Joan Harrison, who goes uncredited. So there's a lot of layers involved in it, and I think that what's interesting is that in spite of how many layers are in there, and in spite how much Hitchcock had a lot of enthusiasm in the pre-production, and then he, according to all reports, became very bored as filming commenced. And based on the way we've been talking about how Hitchcock preferred the pre-production, and then he would be like, okay, it's ready to shoot, so it's just point and shoot at this point. This seems to be like a case where it was like, no, this was really boring him. There were reports from cast members saying that he was found taking naps in between takes and during takes. So, like, it was nappy time for Hitchcock. So,
oh, well, I'm a little embarrassed to say that I was then channeling Hitchcock as I was watching it, because I may have had to pause and wake up and rewind several times throughout watching this film to splash some water on.
We may have a Topaz situation on our hands then, because I'm very fond of the silliness of this movie. It's such frivolity, but it's better than what we for my money, it's better than what we discussed in the 3 films that we discussed on your last episode. So that's where I'm kind of like really out to defend the film, I guess. But
yeah, I'll best be able to kind of jump into my my criticisms of the film once we get through the plot. Yeah. It's kind of best to be able to kind of go back and grab from that standpoint.
Exactly.
But yeah, we'll get into it.
Yeah, and but we'll do the cast here because there's some good names to take note of. We have Derek DeMarney playing Robert Tisdale. We have Percy Marmont. We have Edward Rigby, Mary Claire, John Longden, who is a returning Hitchcock player who was in things like The Skin Game and Juno and the Paycock. George Curzon, Basil Radford, Pamela Carm, George Merritt, J.H. Roberts, Jerry Verno, H.F. Maltby, John Miller, Sid Crossley, Torrin Thatcher, Anna Cronston, and Bill Shine. There's other actors in there that are uncredited that thankfully IMDb has identified, and we'll touch on them as we can go along.
Now you said Derek DeMarney was playing who? I'm sorry.
Robert Tisdale, our lead.
No. I'm sorry. I think you mean Beechcroft Manningtree?
Yes. That is a name that he has, and we will talk about it. Beechcroft Manningtree. God, that is a great name, and we're going to get to it. But I didn't even mention...
Also, I would like to very sadly say that there is no credit for Towser the dog.
No,
who
there
plays
isn't.
an integral part in the plot. No credit.
But we'll
for
talk about
Towser.
my criticisms of Towser the dog, because this dog thinks he's the shit, and no dog is the shit unless his name is Asta, and he's hanging out with Nick and Nora Charles solving mysteries. So, but he is a fine dog. But I didn't even mention The Girl Who Was Young, which was the U.S. Title of this film was The Girl Was Young, and the girl I speak of playing Erica Burgoyne is Nova Pilbaum. Nova Pilbaum was the little girl in The First Man Who Knew Too Much as the girl who gets kidnapped before they remade the film with a certain actor who's made many appearances on this show. And in that movie, his character is father to a very annoying little boy. It's interesting because we're going to talk a lot about annoying children in this movie as well. But let's go ahead and jump into this plot, Marshall, as we are off to do on this show. We open up on a stormy night and a declaration of fury. Christine! Oh my God! I love the way it opens on that. Like for a movie of that era to just to open in on that dialogue and just like really thrust yourself into the argument. We don't need any real setup. The dialogue, while expositionary, I do feel is like it's very quick. Like it's not trying to bog you down. Like this scene moves in and out really quick, and we see Christine Clay, played by Pamela Carm, in a heated argument with her ex-husband Guy, played by George Curzon. They go into basically their whole history within a few sentences about how she was an actress who went to work for the screen and suddenly became disinterested in her husband and then started flirting around with chorus boys and every other person you can think of. And this guy named Guy will not accept her Reno divorce, as is mentioned in the dialogue of this movie. And he's accusing her of having an affair within the proceedings of this divorce. She slaps the shit.
Multiple affairs.
Yeah, no, he's basically convinced that she is, like completely
Mrs. Robin singing.
Any grounds he would have for success in a divorce court, like and she slaps the shit out of him as a result of those accusations. In one of the more classiest slap sequences you'll ever see in a movie. Like I usually you get one good smack. Whether it's a guy smacking a girl or a girl smacking a guy, like whatever the case may be. Usually it's one slap and you're done. No, she goes smack, 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 smack. It's verging on Three Stooges territory here.
Yeah, it's a full-on assault.
Yeah, the only difference is that nobody goes, "Why you come here?" So he leaves, and as he leaves and he's left outside, his eyes start to twitch.
Yes, he storms out to the balcony to brood and twitch.
Yep, and now the twitching may not sound important, but it will be important. But then the next morning we're out on the beach. There's a quick insert shot of some seagulls, and Hitchcock looks at that and goes, I may make a movie about those later.
I'm not bored by this one shot. I'll make a whole movie about it.
No. I did this to you. See, you guys think that I just come up with ideas like out of nowhere, these opportunities just drop in my lap on accident. No, they're all pre-planned. Like I built the Hitchcock universe to end at a certain point. And I can't tell you how important it was to have this shot of these birds flying, because I wanted you all to know that someday there will be a movie about birds. The end. So, but it is a cool scene that kind of very well. The music's well orchestrated and cues us into the fact that Christine is dead. And her body washes ashore, which, by the way, it was interesting to watch her body floating ashore, because I don't know if they used a dummy in the water for some of the initial shots, but it looks like her body's actually getting rocked back and forth, and that they kind of choreographed that pretty well.
I don't think it was a dummy. I think it was shot really well, and it's actually quite out of place, I would say, in a Hitchcock film in terms of we actually brought a camera outside to an outdoor location, and we don't have actors running on a sand-covered stage with a rear projection behind them. For the beach, that entire sequence was actually played out in a little cove on a beach, which is kind of cool to see.
And then what's interesting, though, is that the remaining scenes all take place inside studio. They're not. This is one of the few shots that is shot outside, because then everything else is done with matte painting afterwards. None of the main characters leave a studio, really, which is typical of the era. But this in particular is interesting for Hitchcock because he has been noted that he doesn't like the outdoors. I don't fucking like it. So for him to go out and get that shot, pretty cool. And it could have been second unit for all we know, because it's not like they didn't have second unit back then.
Well, they had Derek there, right?
Yeah. We do have Derek, like off on the cliff. So he's walking by.
Yeah,
and
dude, Robert Tisdale walking by, sees a dead body, runs down, knows who it is.
Yep, he notices.
Then runs off to go get help.
Yep, it's like, it's that lady, and then two women arrive as they see him running away, and then the police are called in. He comes back, and the women point and say he must have done it, and they give their statement about how they saw him running away from the scene. He tries to explain that he was trying to go out and get help after he saw her washed ashore, and it doesn't look good for him on first impression alone, because you're looking at it and just there's a moment where the two young women's suspicions aren't out of merit based on what they're seeing, but clearly he's being set up or being falsely accused.
There's some pretty strange, weird, weak logic and lack of questioning going on to kind of get us in, to thrust us into the plot, to kind of set that up. I think that there's a little bit around if he was going to run for help, then how did the women get police there before he did? Is definitely a question I would have asked if I was the inspector or the police officer there on board. But also I think that Guy being present is a pretty loose connection to a dead body washing up on the shore.
Normally I would agree with you, Marshall, on this, and I do generally agree with you on this logic. But having seen the Paradise Lost documentaries, I'm not surprised if a law enforcement officer decides to just to move along in questioning and just get somebody in jail. So,
Well, I also question their ability to identify him from the back as he's running away at a distance, as well as why no one thought to bring up the defense of, why would I come back? Yeah,
exactly. And before we jump into that, I will point out that as things do wash ashore, an overcoat belt does wash up as well. And so again, relying into that MacGuffin, and I mean it's identifying what clearly would have been used to murder her, and it also puts. It technically puts Robert in an awkward position, because as he's later brought in for questioning, the overcoat belt becomes our key point of trying to figure out if Robert is innocent.
Yes.
And
the police officer on the scene is able to see without touching her that she didn't in fact drown, that she was strangled, and that she was just strangled very recently.
Yes.
And so if he was just here, if Robert was running away very recently, then he must have been the one to strangle her.
Yeah,
and also in a clearly amazing line of defense, he says, "Oh yeah, I have a raincoat, and it has a belt."
Yeah, exactly. And it should be established as he's brought in for questioning. Like, we do get that montage of newspapers, and I want to bring this up because I sometimes I like looking at these old creations of newspapers for film, because they clearly try to create it so that their headline fits within the aesthetic of an actual paper, right? And the one that I love the most, the headline that I saw off to the side is, "He sold a refrigerator, and that's it." I want to know what happened to the guy who sold the refrigerator, Marshall. Like, it's not that I don't want to know what happened to Christine Clay, but he sold a refrigerator, but this isn't an advertisement. This is a headline. What the fuck happened after he sold that refrigerator? So that was it's interesting how suddenly the news breaks out pretty quickly. So we are dealing with an accelerated timeline at that point. And he gets questioned overnight. And it's brought up within that defense that he had a coat, but it was stolen from him, and he doesn't remember when, but he knows that he went to a petrol station to get cigarettes, and when he came out, the coat was gone, and that it was outside of Tom's Hat, which is the dining section of this fill-up station, and he doesn't know where it is, so he doesn't have his alibi, essentially. His alibi is the raincoat with the overcoat belt in it. So,
yeah, which took a bit. I will say, and I don't know if it was the particular editing I did in doing research on this film, have found that apparently there are several different edits of the film prior to its restoration that get kind of bad. And I did not watch the Criterion restored version, so this may be accounting for that. But the dialogue is very quick, very overlapping.
Yeah, really quickly, what version did you watch?
It was, I think, there was a watercolor mark that would come up on the image from time to time from I think Synapse Corporation. So it was one of the companies that sort of snatched up some print of it when it hit public domain.
Yes, from Bootleg Bill and his his dastardly deeds in film distribution.
But yeah, there's the looseness of the accusation was a little bit tough for me to sort of like catch back up with, about just being like, I guess this is the ride that we're on, so I'm just going to sit back and go with it. But it was just sort of like some random belt is also on the shore, and I understand the connection if she's been strangled.
Well, the connection
if that ends up being the case.
Yeah,
but connection. Then the fact that go ahead.
No, I was going to say the connection to that belt will technically become a little bit clearer by the end, but
I mean about like why it's so important that he find the coat is that it's like, I had a coat that had a belt, but there's no connection with this belt to him or to his coat, and why him proving, like, it's like, I don't know. And maybe, I mean, I'm definitely approaching it from a modern, like, forensic police investigation standpoint, about just being like, I can't think of much more of a loose evidentiary chain in terms of like, this guy freely offered that he had a raincoat, and we're assuming that the raincoat had a belt, and that because we can't find it, he must have ditched the raincoat but not the belt, and he was caught red-handed with the dead body in the middle of the day on a beach. Like, it again, there's a certain point where I just like turned that part of me off. But it took a minute or two.
Well, you took off your CSI hat and you put on your Robert Stack and Unsolved Mysteries hat, and you said to yourself, maybe I can solve the mystery. But no, I mean, and the key part of this, of him finding the coat, is that if he finds the coat and the belt's still there, it means that could not be his belt at the scene. So,
but that is like, to me, is like, it from a prosecutorial standpoint, there's actually nothing connecting the belt with him, and from a defense standpoint, from a defense standpoint, there's nothing connecting the belt to him. From a prosecutorial standpoint, him proving that he found his coat with the belt still intact does nothing to say that, so therefore it was impossible for you to get another belt and strangle her with that. Is bonkers to me.
So you think that if let's say Sam Watterson from Law and Order is handling this investigation, you think it might be a little bit clearer? Because I think Jack McCoy could get it done. Well,
I think that, just like, as you brilliantly called it out as a giant capital M MacGuffin, and it just seems like such a weak MacGuffin to me, given what's at stake here. That it's just like, oh great, you found your coat, it has a belt, so now prove that you didn't get another belt and strangle her with it.
Yeah, it's
like, oh, so and in the meantime, to find the coat to see if it had a belt in it, you also escaped a courtroom and went on the lam and quote unquote kidnapped a woman, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I just the plot setup was very loose to me. Yeah. Once I got over that, then I could continue on with the film.
You know what's funny, as I noticed as we're going to go along, I kind of realized that, within the production note that Hitchcock kind of lost interest at a certain point after the pre-production of the film. What's interesting is that, like, because everything is set up as such, that it almost seems like it's that autopilot we talked about in our second episode together when we talked about Torn Curtain and Topaz. But what's interesting about this particular autopilot is that because it's so early on, it's still enjoyable. And it's so, like, if we're going chronologically, there's still a charm to it that, say, stuff like Topaz obviously does not have. And thus leaves Topaz in that weird, pickle that it finds itself in as a legacy of a film. But the MacGuffin itself is very transparent, and so like it's almost, I don't want to say Hitch is being self-aware, but it feels like you could read it that way if you wanted to. I think that would be stretching things a bit, but it seems like it can't be accidental that it's this obvious, because he hasn't really leaned into it before this, and he doesn't really tend to lean too hard on the MacGuffin afterwards. So,
well, I think it speaks a little bit to the adaptation is what I would blame a little bit, because the part of the original novel that essentially is this film is just the first third of the novel. It's very similar setup. Actress washes ashore. They think a guy did it. His innocence is tied to this belt, and so then he escapes and goes on the hunt for the coat with the belt, and they find it with the belt, and then that part of the plot is over, and then the inspector, who's the main character of the book, just goes on to continue to look for the actual murderer. So I think that it was a little bit of a struggle in the adaptation to divorce the importance of the coat, when that was the whole reason for the subplot in the novel, was this connection to the coat, and it ended up being as loose in the novel as it actually would be in real life, but because they decided to have that story encompass their entire film, meant that by maintaining the importance of the coat, it gave this sort of like weak foundation to the MacGuffin and the thing that they were after.
Here's actually, you bring up a very good point, and I have a theory I want to pitch to you. Hear me out on my wild out and crazy theory.
Go for it.
So when we talked about Secret Agent on the last episode you were on, we talked about how he was adapting previous source material in a series of novels about a secret agent. And it's almost like he kind of learned from that film, well, adapting these stories about established characters in detective series doesn't really work for me, but this first third is interesting. So when he removes the Alan Grant character from this story into this story that clearly interests him more, he's also finding himself in a difficult position of how to expand it so that it's cohesive.
I think the theme of my 5 episodes is, you can just call them the protagonist problem saga. And this is definitely that I think that in the novel, your protagonist obviously is the thrust of this detective who's given this case to solve. When you take the detective out of this story and merge that the police officer in charge of the investigation into your female lead's father, becomes the constable character. Constable, what is their last name?
Constable Burgoyne.
Yes, that's it. Played by Percy Marmont.
Yeah.
You have a character who is in charge of the investigation, who is turned into a tertiary character, and because you have the person who is accused of the character, are accused of the crime, is essentially the main character and who is most affected by the plot, but there is this really strange struggle that is going on between the character of Robert Tisdale and the character of Erica Burgoyne about who's actually the protagonist and who's actually driving the story. Because from an extent, it is Robert, because he escapes and then goes on the hunt for this jacket. But on the other hand, he's just sort of like placed into the situation, and then she's the one is sort of she's driving the story through the entire second act.
Yeah, and by she, we should reveal her now, the girl, the innocent, whereas Robert is the young. Robert's the young. Robert's the innocent. We'll meet the young, the one and only.
Yeah, I think. I mean, that's also regardless of what title you want to go with, the British title of Young and Innocent or the U.S. title, The Girl Was Young. It's an abysmal title, because it, like the boys that Christine, the woman who's murdered, is accused of sleeping around with, are so explicitly pointed out as being young boys.
Yeah.
That she's been sleeping around with young boys, and that's what her ex-husband is accusing her of, or her husband is accusing her of.
Yeah.
And then along comes this guy who's accused of killing her, who has a past history with her. So it's the movie, the script and the dialogue has been like, oh, well, is he the young?
Yeah.
But he's also innocent. And then who is this girl? And then you look and you find that, well, the Girl Was Young was the U.S. title, which somehow places her as the main character, even though she's just sort of wrapped up in the plot. It's definitely, again, my my entrance to most story analyzing is always who's the protagonist and what's on the line. And this movie makes it hard.
What's interesting about how this plays out, and you're right, not only does he know her prior, but she had left him 1,200 pounds in her will, so which leads him to faint. And when
I did some research, which is bonkers. 1,200 pounds in 1937, when this movie was made, is just about $1 million.
Yipers, man.
Yeah. Ooh. So when they say, "Oh, there's our motive," and that's why that's so important,
innocent and rich, baby.
I did some backwards math. Yeah, it's just under $1 million.
Yipes! That is a chunk of change, my friend. It's every time it's kind of easier for us to conceive it in American dollars, but like even adding in the pound and whatnot, and what the value of the pound would have been at the time, like. I mean, anytime I hear somebody say, like, it'll cost about $100 in anything from the 1930s and 40s, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a big chunk of fucking money. like that ain't short change, my friend.
Yes, and in fact, sort of catching us up into the plot, where our main character gets assigned this ridiculous barrister.
But before that, he faints. He faints at the news of finding out that he has received 1,200 pounds, and as he faints, it just so happens that the constable's daughter, Erica, played by Nova Pilbaum, enters and helps him recover from techniques that she learned being around the different police officers, and also her time with a boxer. So she's established right away as being able to hold her own in her own way. What I find interesting about Erica as a character, as we're gonna find out through, like, even though she may not be the driving force of the plot, we spend a lot of time with her in a way that I find interesting for Hitchcock in this era. Like, he spends more time with her in this movie than he does with his female protagonists in movies prior.
She's a phenomenal character. I really like. Nova.
Now, when it comes to, like, his female characters prior to this, they are important and they are established and they are dissected, but this one seems like, for whatever reason, it feels like the attention is very focused. Part of it might be that this is Nova Pilbaum's first big romantic role after she had turned 18, so, like, there's also another angle of, like, the star of The Man Who Knew Too Much is now, an adult, and therefore, she's going to become a full blossomed actress. So there
she wasn't quite 18 yet. She was 17 when they made this.
17, that's right. Sorry, my bad. So basically there's almost a position. It almost feels like it's a star vehicle for her in a certain sense, even though, obviously there are other factors involved into why Hitchcock would want to do it. But it seems like this kind of happens on as a happenstance, and as a result, he's clearly more interested in the female character to begin with as he plans, because we spend a lot of time with her, and also her emotional wrestling with what she's doing and who she's gotten tangled up with as we go along. But she helps him recover, and then Robert is, as you said, given incompetent law counsel in the form of a man who can't remember where his fucking glasses are.
Yes, but the thing I was going to bring up regarding the money is Robert hands over £2, which again in 1937 is the equivalent of about $150.
Jesus Christ!
So it's, I don't know, it's this weird, and again, I think that one of the criticisms that I have of the film is this weird sort of balance that they're playing with Robert Tisdale, is that he's sort of presented as this like down on his luck vagabond who doesn't have much money to his name, but also like carrying $150 in cash is a little like it. That to me contrasts with him giving his last 3 shillings to pay for gas. Now knowing how much that was, like watching the movie, I was like, oh yeah, $2. Okay, I guess that's all the money he has. It's not that much, and this lawyer is so cheap that he's just going to kind of accept whatever. But once I did the pound and inflation conversion, I was like, oh, he had $150 in his pocket. Okay, well that changes things, I think, a little bit for me. But again, like you said, Hitchcock was more interested in the Nova character because we don't really know much about Robert at all.
I can describe Robert as a character because you brought up a beautiful word called vagabond, and it comes from a song by Rudy Valley, and I will now sing for the first and only time on this show. Oh, I'm just a vagabond lover in search of a sweetheart at sea, because he does find a sweetheart at sea. Everybody, I connected Rudy Valley to Hitchcock. Thank you very much. We're done with this fucking show. Good night, everybody. But no, he it's interesting though. I guess if anything, it shows that he's more willing to risk everything to prove his innocence, because you don't want to be convicted of murder, no matter where you come from or what your social status is or anything like that. It's scary, but again, it's interesting how he is willing to part with things, and it's interesting also to the fact of when we get to that gas scene. But we have to talk about one of the greatest escapes ever committed to celluloid. And I don't mean that as a joke. Like, I do find this interesting in a certain respect. So the way Robert escapes is he has stashed away his barrister's glasses. The barrister is on his way to preside over another case, and he asks them to delay the proceedings while he gets his glasses. And then they are let out of the room. And then we cut to the courtroom that is overcrowded. We're dealing with an overcrowding issue. So, like, it's not to obviously draw, like, specific allegories to today, but, like, this overcrowding of the justice system, this is not just an issue that you can allude to today. It's, like, ongoing. And he uses that to his advantage to escape by mixing in with a crowd that's in the observance box, and then it is established that the lawyer and the other cops that were leading him in initially think he's escaped. And meanwhile, he's actually in plain sight. He then puts on the glasses and dips out the back door. I mean, obviously, like, it's something that as we've discussed before about, like, things you could only get away with in a certain time period. I found it to be quite charming how he escapes, because I was like, that's pretty neat. Like, that's pretty cool that you kind of use the overcrowding to your advantage to slip out the back, in a way that obviously you could not you could not do that in a film today and stand on your own 2 feet and firmly justify that decision. Like, nobody could do it. Scorsese couldn't even do that.
Yeah, I think it would need to be executed better today. I think it could be done. I think that maybe, I don't know. I mean, definitely not in like a modern court scenario. There's no way to get that done, but like, because he's not in any sort of a jumpsuit or cuffed or anything like that. But I think that, to be honest with you, while I was watching this, I was still trying to put together what the actual significance of the coat and the belt and the, like, I was caught in that. So I look up and he's sitting down and no one's paying attention to him anymore, and he flips on the glasses and then he escapes. And I came really close to pausing the movie and rewinding it to be like, I think I understand what just happened, but how is any of that possible? And and that was the moment that I just clicked and I was like, you know what? It doesn't matter. I'm just going to go on with this ride. I don't need to see a clinical look at, like, how did he blend in with the crowd in a courtroom where he is going to be on trial for murder. It doesn't make any sense. So I was just like, I don't need to see this again. Let's keep watching and let's see what happens.
So here's the thing. I went back a couple times to analyze it as close I could frame by frame, and as he's walking out with the barrister, there's a disruption, and then he kind of blends in from there and darts away, and then they kind of like see that there's another young man in his place, and they're like, well, that's the wrong person. So like, it's a quick cut. It's almost like it in a way, because of, I don't know if this is trimmed over from the version I saw was the restoration that was then put on the MGM DVDs that were released in the late 2000s. So it's established in such a quick way that almost it's trying to fool you, like throw you off a bit and kind of like awe you and surprise you at the way he was able to escape. But it is laid out. Like, Hitchcock's not, he's not lazy enough to basically just kind of wing it. Like, he does, it is detailed out. But if,
oh yeah, I mean, and I just, for me, it's just sort of the logic of it, and I'm always willing to raise my suspension of disbelief to the level that a movie requires of me.
Of course you are.
I think that,
we've seen movies where Rose McGowan has a machine gun leg. We are able to do anything.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm not being, I don't think that I'm being overly rigid here, but we're also talking about a movie that in the exact same movie, a cop later on in the film who has only seen a picture of Robert is able to identify him just by running into him on the street.
Yeah.
And so the fact that, like, that's possible, but the police officer who's in charge of guarding the people that are being brought to trial, and this particular one is on trial for murder, and it's already been stated that there hasn't been a murder investigation in this town for 12 years, that he is able to lose sight of him in this crowd and like has forgotten what he looks like in that amount of time, was just like it's just a bridge, maybe 14 bridges too far.
I have two possible solutions that would fix this in an instant. One, we retroactively make it the town of Sanford before Nicholas Angel got there, and there hadn't been a murder there in 50 years until that murder happened, and then 20 years later, a bunch of other ones would happen. The other one is that if I can retroactively put Twitter and social media into this movie, that's how the information will travel that fast. But and keep in mind, I don't like fucking Twitter. I never fucking liked it. I liked Friendster. That was my thing. That was my bag. It's a shame that it didn't succeed. So he escapes though, and he basically gets away by riding on the back of Erica's car, and in a scene that obviously you see curbed in other movies, not the least of which to our modern eyes would be, Marty McFly sketching on the back of a truck because he's late for school. So, like, that's a fun little, kind of like cheeky way of escaping. Like, it also kind of reminds me of silent films and the way people would kind of escape that way. Oh, and by the way,
the cars back then they had an entire runner board to step up into. So I think he was just sort of hanging on and had his feet up on that.
Yeah, and there's silent films of the era where comedians would hitch on the back of it, and I always find it a very charming image. It's one that I've always tried to figure out how you could do it from a modern context. and not involve the skateboard like Marty McFly does. Because I'm just like, that just seems like it's too dangerous to try to pull that off on an independent scale. But is there a way to do this in a way that won't lead to an accident? And the answer is I don't know. What I do know is before we can jump any further, though, we have to talk about Hitchcock's cameo in this movie, which comes after the escape. And the police are out there, and everybody's, asking questions, trying to figure out what's going on. And we have me, and I'm there with my little camera, and I'm kind of basically doing a photo shoot of these detectives, but I'm also trying to make it look like I'm not doing that. This camera's really tiny. This is like clearly one of those like personal cameras, and like I love him it might be one of my favorite cameos. It's not my favorite cameo. Obviously, I'm a little bit more predilected to the ones he does later down the line, including some of the more ridiculous ones. But this one in particular is fun because he's actually there for a long ass time. It's not like a blink. He's there for a while. He's an active part of the scene, and it's kind of cool.
And he's kind of hamming it up.
Oh yeah, he is. You can see the range of expressions on his face. If you took still frames of the different facial expressions he makes, you could make that those things that actors make to show their range, where it's like 4-quadrant board of their different expressions, and then you could just Photoshop on there like different uniforms. Like one he's a tennis player, and the other one he's a cowboy. It's kind of beautiful, and also the way he's moving the camera. This is going to sound really cheeky and cheesy of me, but like the way he was moving that camera around and whatnot, I've seen this film many times, but last night when I rewatched it, I noticed this, and I started going, "Work it, baby! You're a tiger! You're Tony the Tiger! You're great! Yeah, baby! Yeah!" Like I immediately went to Austin Powers the way he's moving that camera. It's so weird. Like it's not fake photography because that camera's so small that might be how you use that one. But I was just reminded of the hand movement of fucking Austin Powers clearly not taking good pictures in his photo shoots in The Spy Who Shagged Me. So he escapes, and by hitching on the back of the car, as we've established, she is meanwhile trailed off with the police in her car while he's on the back of it. So he's already risking being caught immediately if the cops were to ever turn their heads and go, huh?
Everyone goes on the search for him.
Yes,
and
exactly.
One of the cops jumps in the car with her, and they take off in just some direction looking for him.
Yes, and as they drive along, the car runs out of gas, and you have the inspector. You have the police constable and a police sergeant in there, and like this scene's kind of funny because it draws an allusion to something that would happen 40-ish years later. And so it runs out of gas. They're going to continue the pursuit. They halt a man with a pig cart and demand to get in, like commandeering his vehicle, essentially. And as they're getting in and they're trying to rearrange themselves around the pigs that are kept in the back of this cart, they're complaining about the space. And the man who drives the cart says it's not supposed to hold more than 10 pigs. And, you could argue that you're not supposed to read into these things and whatnot, but, like, it's not supposed to hold more than 10 pigs in there. And there are now technically more than 10 pigs in it.
Yeah,
Marshall, I smell bacon. Do you smell bacon?
I'm looking up right now when cops started to become referred to as pigs.
It seemed like, honestly, if I'm being realistic, it's probably more or less something that came out of the 60s in the counterculture, and so that it doesn't seem like it would play today, but it plays interestingly today, the way that line is presented with what we have for terminology now.
Oh, yeah, very much so. And, I mean, it seems like they lean pretty heavy into it. I mean, it's like the interaction with the cops and the pigs and the cart in that scene is like Fritz the Cat level on the nose. The police actually just are pigs. I mean, when the cart takes off, they literally fall back into the pin with them. So I imagine that it was an on purpose sort of joke.
Yeah. So as they go off in the pig cart, she starts pushing her car again, and then she notices suddenly that her car is much easier to push. Why? Because suddenly Robert pops his head up and goes, "Hello, like, I'm here." And they take it to the petrol station. She doesn't have any money for the petrol. He gives his last 3 shillings.
But she doesn't know that yet. He just pays for it.
Yeah, exactly. And so she then drives him to this abandoned house, and he kind of, it's weird, like the banter suggests that he's playing coy with her in a Robert Donat kind of way, where, he's just like, oh, like, I know what you're doing. You're leaving me here, and then you're going to pick me up tomorrow to then go to the Old Tom Hat and find my raincoat. Because at this point, she is aware of what his claim to an alibi is. So, and then she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just getting you out of my fucking car. Like,
yeah,
you're a criminal. Like,
yeah. And then he goes inside and starts slowly creeping up the staircase. And at the top, there's a homeless person who looks over the edge and sees him. And he gets to the top and no, there's a dead body up there. And now they're trying to figure out who put... Oh, wait, no, that's number 17. Sorry. I got mixed up with the creepy houses that people go into.
There's fun. I've got a number 17 illusion as we get later into this movie, but it's not where you think it's going to be. So he stays in that barn for the night. We go back to Erica's house with her having breakfast with her family and the constable. We meet Erica's brothers.
Yeah, important to note that he watches her driving away.
Yes.
And he sees the cops coming back in the opposite direction, and they stop and talk. And then she drives on, and the cops do not turn in towards the house, so she did not give him up.
Yes.
And a little smile creeps across his face.
Yes, which is important because it's the earlier equivalent of that Rudolph the Red-Nosed line. She thinks I'm cute. So we get a breakfast scene here where we learn a little bit more about, to an extent, Erica's family life.
Zach, tell me we have to talk about the breakfast scene.
We don't have to talk about it entirely, but I do want to bring up...
Just tell me we have to talk about the breakfast scene.
I mean, we can if you want. I mean, Marshall, you seem to really want to talk about this breakfast scene. Marshall, what would you like to tell us about this breakfast scene?
No, I wanted to be her brother who keeps getting told to do stuff, and then he always answers, okay. That's all.
What's interesting about this whole family is that they are establishing something that comes further down the line of like this idea where the women in the family are much more capable and a much more serious mind, and the men at the young men at any given dinner table circumstance or family situation are trapped in their inability to think. And we talked about this on the Shadow of a Doubt episode, where the young brother in that movie is essentially there to be a young boy and nothing else. And here we get like 5 or 6 of these characterizations, and what I think it does for here specifically is it further emphasizes Erica's serious mind and her thoughtfulness growing up amidst this room of male brats. So and at this point she's still feeling uneasy about leaving Robert behind, so as the constable is called away on a phone call, she finds a way to kind of exit the breakfast scene.
Right, because she ends up finding out in that scene that the only money he had to his name were these 3 shillings that he used to pay for her gas.
Right,
and so that is this moment of like, oh, wow, this guy gave up. He's on the run, and his life is on the line, and he gave up the last of his money, you know, to pay for my gas because I ran out of gas.
Be like, wow, he gave up $300,000 worth of 2020 money to pay for our gas, because that's where gas prices are gonna head eventually. I'm just assuming, based on how I see them climb. But so
I've seen Mad Max. I know. How
yeah, oh God, witness me indeed. Like, so she sneaks out to go back to the house with not only the 3 shillings but also a little bit of food. She goes up there, and it's actually a beautiful shot craning up as she goes up the stairs and kind of showing the encompassment of the set. Something that I like about the British period specifically is that there are moments where the sets are very elaborate and shot in the black and white format that they are. Like, it really captures the feeling of English countryside. It's not it's not explicitly spooky in this particular instance like it is in other films. Like you could argue that like even Foreign Correspondent, which is an American film, has that same aesthetic in the windmill. But this in particular is just kind of like establishing like the depths, the lower depths that Robert has to go in order to clear his name, and the mood, despite it being a comedy of sorts, the mood of it is primarily kind of dreary. Like it's there's a bit of desperation in there, and I think it's beautifully shot in that respect.
It is.
So she goes and she finds him in the hay. She tries to leave the shillings there. They drop off of him when he tumbles over, and then he sees that he's there. She's there, and then they have further banter back and forth, to which basically she is agreeing at the very least to get him over to Tom's hat. Or no, she doesn't actually. I'm sorry, I take that back. She's thoroughly convinced that he needs to give himself up. And as they go through their banter, the police are walking by again, and they go and look up and go like, they see movement up in the barn, and they go like, "You don't suppose it's?" "Yeah, it probably is." Again, another example of police assumption in this film, which, you know, we're talking about the inefficiency of law enforcement in this film. This seems like it's an extension of the different times Alfred Hitchcock pokes fun at police authority, because this is not uncharted territory for him. He's done it in many films that we've talked about, specifically Psycho, where he points to the intimidation of the police. In this one, he might be pointing towards the bumbling of police in certain matters. So I find it interesting how he kind of runs the gamut in different ways of portraying law enforcement in that respect. In Rear Window, it's the most grounded because they have to keep convincing Jimmy Stewart that you can't just break into somebody's house to take evidence.
Right.
So they get away, and at this point, like, she stops the car and basically tells him why she can't take him to Tom's hat, and they're about to basically go back to town, and they get to a fork in the road, and the road is blocked to town. So they're going to take the left turn, and they get over to Tom's hat. And they're trying to indicate, if she goes in to indicate where the coat might be. As the time has gone on and she has made that turn in the fork in the road, she is basically curious as to whether or not any of this is true, or starts believing him a little bit more. These tropes of them slowly gaining each other's trust are things you see before in things like the 39 Steps, and then actually kind of end up getting a little bit more perfected to an extent in the movie Saboteur that Hitchcock did in 1942. So this is a theme that he kind of deals with, where it's a couple trapped by circumstance that are led into basically learning to trust each other. So she inquires about the overcoat, and the patronage of this diner slowly starts to reveal that there was a coat that had probably been stolen because a bum came in and was wearing a new overcoat, and they thought it was impossible that he would be able to procure such a nice coat. This person they are alluding to is Old Will, who's a China mender,
He mends porcelain dishes.
But what's funny about the scene is that like they're slowly giving up the information bit by bit, but as they are, they're also telling each other to shut the fuck up because the snitches get stitches. So
yeah,
eventually all of this leads to a big old brawl inside this diner. And it's a fun scene. It's a fun little fight scene. Obviously, much more experienced and well constructed than what we saw in the fight scene in number 17, where it looked like a Bourne movie. So, in the middle of this fight, she's assured that the coat does exist and it was taken by a guy named Old Will. One of the guys before he is. This is the guy who sacrifices the most in the movie, because before he gets the living shit kicked out of him, he tells him that Old Will stays at a boarding house 30 miles down the road, and then if you want, I'll take you there. But before he can agree to take him there, he gets grabbed by another guy and goes, "Come here, you don't you do that." And then we don't know what happens to that poor sacrificial lamb there, but within that, she agrees, "Hey, I'm starting to believe you a little bit more now." And then he says, "Well, I'm going to go off down the road, and you should probably be getting back." And he starts walking down the road, and Erica goes, "Motherfucker, I'm going." And then, so the next scene we cut to is them in the car, and her way to establish a motive, or establish her whereabouts so that it doesn't conflict, is that she's going to visit her aunt, so that her aunt can confirm she was there on the way to this boarding house. So that's the way she's gonna. So then that way her father doesn't catch on to it. And also she says, "I thought we'd need this cup in case we run into Old Will, and you can have a proper introduction." And she's like, "Well, I don't think we'd need it now," and then just tosses the cup out into the street, and it slashes the tires of another car oncoming. So. Clearly very inconsiderate, but whatever. They're on a fucking mission. They don't have time to worry about that car. And we get to one of the best scenes in the movie in terms of a way it's constructed, not necessarily dialogue-wise. I'm talking more about what happens at the end of it. But something I'll bring up on this, we were talking about the different versions of this film and the different cuts. Mm-hmm. So among the things that were cut from this film are the blind man's buff scene from U.S. Prince. And if you listen to Hitchcock talking about the film with Truffaut, he explains that the issue with them removing that scene is that you took away a thematic element of the film. The thematic element of this film, with the twitching eyes, with people not seeing, is that establishing that the older people in the room are not aware or refusing to be aware of the innocence and the actual circumstances surrounding them, and they're blinded by their own judgment. And in fact, the young and the innocent are the ones who must overcome that blinding. Obviously, as we've discussed, things are on the nose in this film.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that if you remove that scene from the U.S. print, while I don't think you lose anything as a story other than just them leaving, you do lose an interesting scene of, like, the reason they have to escape is this way because when the aunt is blindfolded, it provides the convenient escape.
Right.
But the problem with this plan, obviously, like in terms of her initial plan to get in and get out, is that it was supposed to be her cousin's birthday party, and basically the hindrance of this party leads them into being there longer than they'd hoped. At one point, Robert is going to leave a note saying, "I can't wait in here any longer," but then another car approaches.
Yeah. So the whole idea is that they're driving off to go find Old Will, right? And then he's concerned that her father's going to be concerned, and because he's the constable, I guess send the cops after them. And so she says, "No, I've got it all figured out. We'll stop off at my aunt's. I'll call my dad. We'll be there for 3 minutes, and then I'll continue on. I'll make up some excuse for him."
Yeah.
And so they go to the aunt's house, and it turns out, oh, nope, it's her cousin's birthday, so she's expected to stay longer.
Yeah.
and Robert's left outside, but then her uncle comes home and is like, "What are you doing out here? Come inside.
Yep.
Come to this party."
Really quickly, her uncle, is none other than Basil Radford. You may recall Basil Radford as one Charters of the famous duo Charters and Caldecott from The Lady Vanishes, who would go on to have their own spin-off movie, a film that will be reviewed at some point on a supplemental episode, because I promised Corinne we'd do that, because we have to know what happened to Charters and Caldecott. But here he's just her uncle. And it leads into the game of Blind Man's Bluff, where they're able to sneak out. But part of the problem being is that the aunt has seen Robert, and he gives an alias that we mentioned at the top. But Marshall, give us that alias one more time, that beautiful, beautiful alias.
It is Beechcroft Manningtree.
Beechcroft Manningtree. Out of all the aliases that I have loved in Hitchcock movies, whether it's Huntley Haverstock, and this one is just special because it's so British. It's so British. You can't get past how British that alias is. It is.
Well, even the aunt, who's super British, can't get past it.
Yeah,
it
she's
even
just
catches
like
her
that,
off guard.
She's just like, that's too British. Boys, get him.
The aunt, we should say, is wonderfully played by Mary Clark. She was easily one of my favorite parts of the film.
Oh, she's wonderful.
Really
she
shines in this.
She has it's not aloofness, but it's like it's that kind of stern. Because the way she's interacting with the children at the party, specifically Harold, the boy from hell, like. And also, I think secretly Hitchcock's device to move the plot along, because there's points where the aunt wants to distract things further, and the boy goes like, no, like, we're gonna do this, and I just imagine going like, yeah, that's my little unknown son, plot driver Hitchcock. I put him in there specifically. I called him Harold in this movie. He's a delight. Love little Harold, but he's really going as PD, pitch driver, plot driver. This is what he does. But they get into the game, they sneak out, and the aunt calls the constable I'm trying to remember, the constable is concerned, but but she basically tells him, hey, your daughter was here with a man, and the constable's kind of flabbergasted by this, but like, well, she tells me about everybody she's going with, and then she mentions the name of a person that it might have been, and then goes, and he says, but he's in India, and it's like, oh, then it couldn't have been him, which leads to further suspicion by the constable that something's afoot, and they get as far as the train tracks, and we get this miniature scene, which. So this isn't unheard of for Hitchcock. We've discussed it before, how the miniatures are used on stuff like Number 17 that I'm coming down the line. And we've also talked about these miniature sequences in something like The Lady Vanishes, which I think, because The Lady Vanishes comes out a year later, they're more slick and effective in the opening shot of that movie. The only thing that makes this particular shot a little jarring is because we end it primarily on a exterior of the car where there are clearly two action figures there, before we cut to the inside of the car with them in it, and her basically agreeing to stay there while he goes to the boarding house to find old Will.
Yeah, and I thought it was really, really weird to use a Lion-O and a Skeletor action figure for.
They were the only one.
Erica and Robert.
They were the only action figures I had at the time, you ass. I couldn't afford a Transformer. What do you think I made of fucking money?
The Transformer was the car.
Yeah, no. You know who could afford it? Orson Welles, because he clearly did a voice for it at the end of his fucking life. I shouldn't know that because I died years before that happened. But you know what I mean. But no, it's the thing. Like, it's not like it's only jarring to us today because of we can tell it clearly from whatever resolution point we're watching this movie. In my case, I was able to watch it in basically 720p on a 4K TV. So it looked fine. Like the DVD print was fine. But you can tell it's a figure. I'm assuring audiences back in the day, even if they could tell it, they're still entranced by the shot because a shot like that wasn't really being done, especially in Britain, other than people by Hitchcock. So it would probably, their suspense might be a little bit more focused on the shot itself and not necessarily what's contained specifically within it. But it's an example of Hitchcock using different techniques and stuff that technically look outdated today. But like if you look at it from the perspective of like him using miniatures to establish a shot, it does look beautiful. Like the miniatures themselves of the different buildings and the bridge do not look, and the trains do not look like too toyish or anything. Like they're not.
No, I thought the shot worked really well. Actually, I mean, while it was going on, I sort of like, I glanced back and was like, wait a second, is that a miniature? No, that's not a miniature. Those buildings look too. Oh wait, no, I think that's that's not a. Yeah, the trains are definitely miniature. Oh, they're the figures.
Yeah,
but I thought it worked really well. The ones that happen later in the film are not as well done as this opening one, but the opening one, I thought that it worked for me.
Yeah, and I think it throws you off a little bit. It also kind of brings you into his realm of realism, or I don't call it magical realism with Hitchcock. I kind of go, it's flight of fancy for Hitchcock. And this is every film that he does primarily, for the most part, is set in a world that's outside of true convention when it comes to like logic and like things reasonably happening. Like it's a movie. Like he's aware it's a movie. He's gonna make you aware it's a movie.
Yeah. Well, also I think that like the thing that helps give me perspective on Hitchcock, or when I'm watching a Hitchcock film, is that I think that the thing that is of the utmost importance to Hitchcock as the storyteller is control.
Yeah.
And so he's going to sacrifice really a lot in terms of believability or characterization or suspension of disbelief in order to maintain control over the production
and the imagery imagery specifically. Yeah.
Right. That the shot is expansive enough that there probably wasn't a place on Earth that had that sort of geographical setup and that looked that way, that they could control in terms of lighting it to be able to see it, and traffic and people and extras on the budget they were working at in the time span that they were working at. So at that point, it just kind of becomes like, yeah, okay, then build a miniature and I'll do it that way.
Yeah.
And the only thing, so I think that it just kind of becomes an issue of control.
You know what's interesting though? I've realized this as I've gone on through the series, and at the same time that I've done this, I've also really dug back into Martin Scorsese, and I rewatched Hugo not too long ago, and
wonderful film.
I love that movie a lot. And I remember at the time it got shit for its overuse of CGI, which obviously was done in certain respects to achieve certain shots that he wanted for the 3D tech, which, that movie looks great in 3D. And, it's almost like you shouldn't give Martin Scorsese shit for the way the exterior of that train station looks and how he moves into it, because he's clearly taking some inspiration from Hitchcock, as he's done before and will continue to do until he dies. So... because, as we are fully aware, Dial M for Murder was given an introduction by Mr. Scorsese, ranting for a not too long, but for me not long enough about the brilliance of that movie, because I could listen to that man narrate an 8-hour audiobook and it would be spellbinding.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's as far as, when you're talking about if the use of effects over shooting something live or practical.
Yeah.
I think that for master filmmakers, that line has never really been different. I've heard Fincher talk a lot about being really concerned about the budget of his films and the stuff that he does, and not wanting to blow things out of proportion in terms of budget. And so, but his inclination is to always do something practical until it becomes a penny more expensive to do it practical than it would be to do it digital.
Right.
And then he's like, okay, then do it digital.
Yeah. Which is another allusion to, like, you know, we haven't talked on it too much, but Fincher takes a lot from Hitchcock. He's actually been compared to Hitchcock in a lot of respects, in the way that he constructs the film. Like, you know, like there are times when M. Night Shyamalan was getting compared to as the next Hitchcock or the next Spielberg or whatever, and I think actually it applies more to people like Fincher or even Jordan Peele because of how they're constructing their films and how they're constructing the moments that happen into it. And like Zodiac is a great example of, well, we clearly don't have the money to fully recreate San Francisco how it looked in the 70s for this overhead shot of a taxi cab driving down the route that Paul Stein took before the Zodiac shot him outside of Cherry Street. But it's one of those instances where it's like him taking something that you've learned from the past and applying it here with the tech you have today. I think and we've talked about CGI getting kind of like tossed under a bus and whatnot, and I'm guilty of it as well because I like practical more often than not. But I'm learning more over time how CGI is becoming a better tool, in part thanks to you and your discussions on 3D in particular, and how certain things in certain tech innovate that storytelling and can.
Well, I think that's the distinction for me is when CG is used as a Band-Aid, it's usually bad. When it's used to take place of good storytelling, it's almost always bad.
Right.
But when it's being used as a tool, then it's incredible. You know, I think that again, just going to the cost thing, and Fincher is, you know, like Fincher in his films now uses exclusively fake blood for wounds, CGI blood. Because he was tired of wasting all of the time on set to reset, to redress, and, you know, clean an actor off and then redo their hair and their makeup and everything like that just to do one more take.
Yeah.
But if you go back and you look at the films that David Fincher does with blood in them, the blood is seamless. It looks amazing.
Yeah.
And that's because he doesn't just say, just go use stock footage of blood splatters or blood streaming and toss it up there. He says, I want to spend a lot of money to make the blood look really good.
Yeah.
Because I'm saving money here, I'm going to apply it here.
Yeah.
And that judicious approach to making it work and making sure that you do a thing practical until you can't do it practical anymore, and then you find a way to blend that seamlessly digitally. And you know, again, like the two mothers of the CGI film universe that we live in today, Jurassic Park and Terminator 2, both did exactly that.
Yeah.
That anytime they could do something practically, it was there, it was on set, it was practical, and the transitions and the things that they couldn't do practically were filled in with CGI, and it's beautiful and it's seamless.
Yeah, and it lends into its birthplace isn't with Hitchcock. Obviously, other filmmakers had done stuff in this fashion of like using something that is that is not clearly realistic to propel different parts of the story. There's examples that we've looked at over the course of the series, whether it's certain elements of Foreign Correspondent and its visual effects. But Rebecca has a clear instance of it with there's a shot outside of the West Wing with Mrs. Danvers closing the shutters of the window, and it's actually a puppet. They pulled back and from that wide shot because that was the only way it would have gotten the motion that he would have wanted and been clear on screen. You know, so like this is not new for him. And we've talked about obviously in the course of this series how Hitchcock would adapt new technology for his purposes. He wouldn't just frivolously toss it around. But anyway, they talk in the car. She expresses her concerns about what's going on. She doesn't want to feel unsafe. She's clearly a young woman who is, you know, being thrust into a big adventure. And what I appreciate about it is that they do take into account the fact that because she is young, she is not used to this kind of adventure. And nor does it seem like Robert's fully comfortable with it either, but he seems like he's a little bit more knowledgeable about how rocky it can get. And we basically have him leave her there behind while he goes to the boarding house, staying there the night, waking up. He goes to sleep spotting who he believes to be Old Will at the bed number 26. And then he wakes up the next day, and the occupant of the bed number 26 is gone. And so he searches around. He kind of raves a little bit that he's looking for Old Will the Chinamender, and he finds Old Will the Chinamender, played here beautifully by Edward Rigby. Old Will is kind of
another wonderful role, another wonderful role, well played.
Yeah, and to the point where I said that it was something that reminded me of number 17. It was obviously the fact that a hobo was going to play an important part in the conclusion of this story, and because obviously, if you recall number 17, who had the jewels at the end of number 17? Why, our old hobo friend, of course. So,
yes.
So in this particular case, he doesn't obviously know Robert, so Robert's shaking him down, going like, I need that coat. I need that coat. You can have it back when I'm done with it, but it's there to clear my name. He's getting confused. Robert lets it slip that he's wanted for murder. This was the one logic point where I shook my head the first time I saw it, and every time since, going like, why'd you just yell that out loud? But emotionally, I get it. If he's trying to get that coat and he's that desperate, he's gonna let something slip. It just feels a little weird at times. But
yeah, it's an unearned moment. I think that has to do with the characterization and the way that Robert is played up until that point. Because I think that again, I'll hammer this again later. But I think my biggest criticism of the character of Robert Tisdale is he does not care about anything through this whole film until that moment.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to also care as the audience member if he's just like, yeah, I'm having a blast and I know I'm innocent, so I'm going to joke about everything and not really anything's on the line for me because that's the way that my character is written and the way that I'm playing it, and it just it ends up building to this moment that is completely unearned, where he does kind of freak out and lash out, and let spill that he's on trial for murder.
In remembering some of the imagery leading up to it, there is a partial justification for seeing the transition. I don't know if it's strong enough to earn that moment, but hear me out. He does get antsy in the car waiting for Erica. So he is trying to leave that note going like, I'm going to be leaving you now because I can't wait this long. So he's starting to slowly be aware of the risks that are being taken. And
yeah, but it's also just like there's no connection with Erica's aunt and uncle and what the stakes are for him. Like, it's not like they're involved in the case or they would recognize him or anything like that. And before they even got there, he was willing to just walk the 30 miles.
Yeah. So
why he's suddenly in a rush, that because she's inside for 4 minutes rather than the 3 that she said she'd be.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
I don't think that it clearly wraps up that theory, but in thinking of it, like it could be the film's way of trying to justify it. I don't know but I don't think it succeeds because of the fact that obviously the outburst is so large in that film, and we should establish at this point also that he, prior to winding up at the train tracks, they did get they were pulled over by a cop because the cop had gotten a call from the constable to check in on his daughter, and that a man would be with her, and to find out who the man was. So he has had a skirt with the law. So that might be and then again, that's another one that might be putting him on edge. But it feels like it would be better if him being on edge was a little bit more built up in favor of the banter back and forth for the romantic angle. So it seems like those elements, because we really want to make you like these characters, which we do. Like, I do like these characters a lot. We do sacrifice certain details in order to get us there. I think that the power of this film ultimately relies on its charm, and that in some cases, that is enough to get you by on a film, and I think that this is the case in this film, at least for me as a viewer, because I can rewatch this film and enjoy it on a lot of levels while not having to be completely analytical. Obviously, the Shamley Silhouette is dedicating to analyzing this, so obviously I'm going to have to dig deep into my pocket of shame. But anyway, but you're right. There's not a clear through line of him truly breaking down, like, to fully suggest it. Like, even the dialogue doesn't fully suggest it because he still feels a little bit more encouraged and sure of himself, even when he's trying to assure Erica that she'll be safe. Like, there's no hesitation there.
Right.
You know, like, which there should be. But regardless, he does freak out. And everybody in the boarding house
drags old Will out of the boarding house.
Yes, exactly.
Chucks him in the car.
Yep, they get him out to the out a little bit down into town. In part of them trying to escape, they drive their car into an abandoned mine shaft to get away. And they go into the mine shaft, and then the car immediately dips into the fucking ground, and she's about to be pulled into hell.
Yeah, I think the scene outside the apartment building in Ghostbusters, like the ground opens up and takes the car down on this hydraulic lift, and she's trapped in the car.
But it is well photographed, like, undeniably for that era, like, for that kind of mine shaft tumble, like, that's pretty fucking cool. Like,
yeah, it's just really out of left field.
Yeah.
It's well done, and it's relatively well edited. It's a little jarring in the edit, but it is just sort of like, oh, let's go in the mine. Oh, the mine's collapsing, and the car's getting lost in this sunken hole, and we're gonna need Superman to fly the world around backwards to get Lois Lane out of the car, and then it's like, oh, nope, then we're caught back up.
No.
Then she's back being questioned, and that was that scene.
So arguably that is another instance of Hitchcock going like, we need an exciting set piece in this or something to kind of throw in there to add further tension to their struggle. Not necessarily their characters, but their struggle. This isn't the first time he's done this. Like, I mean, like, it's going to sound callous to say, but North by Northwest is full of this. Like,
yeah.
Set piece.
I would love... There's the sneaking suspicion that I have that was a set from a different film that they had the ability to use before it got torn down, because it's like literally, oh, let's go into the abandoned mine, and then cut to another miniature of a car going into a little shaft, and then you have this super elaborate crazy set, and then it ends up amounting to nothing.
You know what?
And then it continues on. Then it's like, I have a hard time believing that they were like, yeah, okay, let's go ahead and use a fifth of the budget to construct this set for this doesn't matter scene.
I do kind of believe that Hitchcock would insist upon that for the creation of the film if that's what he outlined in pre-production. Because I think, like, I mean, either A, he had knowledge of a set that he could use, or B, this is, you know, strictly intentional. But regardless, my theory is that he time traveled the entire set and the crew to 1998 when Joe Johnston was filming the movie October Sky, and utilized one of the coal mines in that movie to get their shot, and then they came right back. You know, that I think that's a sound theory that we can all get behind.
Well, he wouldn't have even needed to construct a time machine. He could have just jumped in the wormhole that Donnie Darko uses to get with Jake Gyllenhaal, who is in October Sky.
Yeah, I do love Jake Gyllenhaal. I do love him. No, I mean, Brokeback Mountain is good too. I really like him in Zodiac because obviously that movie's made for me. I didn't see Stronger, but then again, nobody else did, which is kind of a shame. But I'll see it eventually. It's on my to-do list, like many other people in this world. And also I'm very happy that he encouraged Jamie Lee Curtis to come back for the Halloween series. I was very happy about that when I heard of that in my cloud in heaven. It was a magical day. You know, we all celebrated. You know, Donald Pleasance and I drank champagne till we fucking puked. So anyway, they escape the mine shaft. They get out there. They're completely, all hope is lost. They get the coat. They find out that the coat doesn't have the overcoat belt. Then they are apprehended. The bum gets away, but at this point, Erica's caught and she is being interrogated by the police about her experience, and she's basically trying to compel them to be like, no. The you can't believe that this man's guilty. He's clearly innocent. So she's been won over.
And Robert gets away as well.
Yes, Robert gets away, but in that moment, she's you start seeing her character turn to where she starts really truly caring for Robert. And I'd argue that it's a better transition than most for when the heroine suddenly becomes infatuated with the person that she hasn't been able to stand up till this point. So I think that what this film does from the romantic angle of that same theme in Hitchcock films that permeates is a little bit more fluid in this film than it is prior, because it is a little bit more streamlined to get you to point A to point B in this relationship. Again, the problem, as we discussed, is that it forsakes a lot of elements of the suspense plot as a result. So she goes to bed thinking that all is lost, and then Robert pops up out of the window outside her room, and they embrace, and he reveals we couldn't find anything of the overcoat belt. All we found was a matchbox from the Grand Hotel. Or a stick of matches from the Grand Hotel. And
so he's going to turn himself in.
Yeah, exactly. But then they realize, wait a minute, the Grand Hotel. And we are
I've never been to the Grand Hotel.
We are brought to the Grand Hotel. And a plan is devised to find the man who is twitching his eyes. One of the things that the bum reveals about the man who gave him the coat that belonged to Robert that was then stolen is that the man who gave it to him was twitching his eyes. Now, remember when I said that twitching your eyes would be fucking important? Guess what? It's fucking important now. And what's more, we are treated to one of the most innovative scenes of the movie that definitely plays a part in Hitchcock's work down the line. And also presents an interesting issue for us to talk about because of what's in the scene. But for the shot itself, we're in the Grand Hotel. The bum and Erica are setting up their plan to look for the man with the twitching eyes. From the top of the Grand Hotel in the ballroom, the camera cranes down slowly, sifts through all the tables.
Well, it starts in the lobby.
It starts in the lobby, goes down, sifts through those tables, sifts through that ballroom, and then lands on the bandstand and lands on the drummer, and then the drummer twitches his eyes at the end of the shot.
Yes. So the whole time, because they devise, this matchbox came from the Grand Hotel. I've never been to the Grand Hotel. Whoever stole it and gave it to Old Will must have some sort of connection with the Grand Hotel. Maybe we can get lucky and see him there.
Yes, exactly.
And so, so we get this introduction to the ballroom with this wide sweeping shot. And just to sort of take you through my journey of watching this shot was just like, oh, this is neat. Oh, cool. We're going, because it tracks, it actually starts off what looks like just a dolly shot from up on a second level.
The top level
of the Grand Hotel.
Yeah, the top level of the lobby.
And then you track past a wall into the ballroom, and then you start craning and pushing in past over everyone dancing and everyone seated and eating, and into the band. And so as it gets about halfway there, and I'm not watching a restored print up on in my theater, and I squint and lean forward. I'm like, is that guy in blackface? Yeah. And then it keeps getting closer, and I'm like, wait a second, is the whole band in blackface? And it goes forward, and then it's like, yes, everyone is in blackface. And it keeps going in and keeps going in into a full-on close-up with the drummer that is just in absolute blatant blackface, sitting there drumming, staring forward, and then he blinks, and I was just like, I know this shot was meant to reveal one thing, and it has a little bit of a different meaning for me right now.
Right.
Because we just went into an entire band all in blackface.
Yes.
And purposefully in blackface, because we've already established that the murderer is white. So it's not like blackface a la Birth of a Nation, where
Yeah.
you have white people playing black people in blackface.
Yeah.
These are white characters who are supposed to be white and performers, musicians in the film who are in blackface.
So what's interesting about watching this from a modern lens, there is an immediate reaction that we have, rightfully so, because blackface, wrong then, wrong today. Not even a question or a debate. And obviously, as we are, having reckonings, not just within the recent months, but also within the last couple of years, I think we are learning in our own way how to dissect the imagery of the way blackface is portrayed on cinema at the time. And also we're having an interesting conversation about how it's done today, which, I didn't expect we'd be fully having, but whatever we got to do, I guess. But the blackface is not used, as Marshall said, it's not being used in the Birth of a Nation way of like white people playing black people for the sake of the narrative. It's the way you describe this from a logic standpoint ultimately is that this is something that would have been done by a jazz band or two of the time. That's not to excuse the time period. What is interesting is that it is used to further distract the characters from identifying the killer. Because as he has been established as a white man, suddenly he's in blackface, but are indicators that he's blinking. Now, then the question comes up: is this film, the obvious question will be like, well, is this film, acting racist like Gone with the Wind? And I truly don't think it is. It's not. This is an aesthetic and a set piece that was able to be used of the era. It doesn't excuse it. And what's interesting is that one of the most innovative shots in cinema history, once again, contains something that we find terrifying and horrifying today. I don't know, to me, what's interesting about how it's portrayed is that, again, as I said, I don't think there's any, foul intent. It's not like Hitchcock is doing that intentionally. But it provides, in the pre-planning, it clearly provides a way for us to further be thrown off by the setting until we see the indicator of the blinking eyes. But
yeah, I think that it's a bit of a convenient plot contrivance to kind of say, well, I know that he's in the band, and maybe old Will wouldn't necessarily be thinking that this guy was a musician or is a part of the band, but I think that we need some other sort of disguise wrapped into it. Oh, hey, we know that, rich debutantes, this is a thing that goes on as novelty, is
Jim Crow
wearing blackface,
yeah,
and that sort of thing. So I think that there's a little bit of sort of a laziness in terms of the plot contrivance to it. Although, and I don't know that I would go so far as to say it's a defense of the film, but it is worth noting that they have the villain in blackface.
Yeah.
And so I think that there are plenty of good arguments about whether it is excusable as a use, or that it was in use at all. But being that it was being used specifically by the villain, at least doesn't celebrate it or cast it in a good light because of who's wearing it.
Right. And I'll tell you, it is not our intention when discussing this particular moment to solely focus on this, because we do want to talk about the technical achievement involved in that, creating that shot, because there is a story behind it. But in discussing the content of it, there is obviously a layer to it that is not expected in 1937 to become a point of contention 80 to 90 years later, right? So as we discuss it now and as we look at these things, it behooves us to address it as we have, and to dissect, okay, well, how is it being used here as opposed to in another film like Birth of a Nation? Spike Lee, one of my favorite filmmakers to watch, had pointed out about we need to start providing context within films of this nature, so that you obviously don't want to get rid of them, but you need to show them and then provide context with it. And hopefully, as we've discussed with this, with Dixieland jazz bands and specifically bands using blackface can be construed as something of the era. That's where it leads me to my conclusion that it's not anything intentional by any of the filmmakers or anything as some sort of offense. It is used primarily as a part of the story, but it's not, because it's not strictly addressing race. It's kind of like an afterthought, to a certain respect, other than the fact that it is the identifier of the killer, to show the identifier of the winking eyes. And again, I may not be explaining myself fully well, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'll ask it in the form of a question, Marshall. Does it detract you from ever wanting to watch the movie again if you were so inclined?
No, but I don't have that sort of connection with films. Interestingly enough, though, I think that actually might be worth some introspection for me, is that where different people involved in the films can totally detract from my willingness to want to watch a movie again.
Right.
But in terms of the content, I think it is very important to expose oneself to uncomfortable things.
Yeah. As we've discussed in Martin too.
Right. I did not watch Young and Innocent, and nor would I watch it again, knowing the use of blackface in this in a celebratory standpoint. It wasn't ooh, yay, fun, blackface. It's something that was oh, goodness, this is a thing that I'm watching right now, and it is a part of the plot. It's woven into it, and I think that it speaks to, in a hindsight perspective, especially from two people who are fans of Alfred Hitchcock. There are plenty of positions that can be taken to really want to look at it with a grain of salt, or give Hitchcock the benefit of the doubt, and try to justify or reduce the amount of responsibility had in this sort of portrayal. Like I said that I did with the fact that it's the villain who's wearing it. I think that there's definitely an angle that could be approached with saying that throughout the entire film, we have been dealing with people who are a part of a middle and below in terms of socioeconomic class.
Yeah. That
the highest we really get is this police chief, this constable, and his family. But Robert clearly isn't from money. Old Will clearly is not from money. We're living in this world that are people that are more on the side of the have-nots than the haves.
Yeah.
And the person that we know from the beginning of the film that has committed this murder is a have. He's a guy who had the power to lord over the fact that he gave this woman a career before being so angered that he was slapped that he killed her. But this is the first time that we're actually thrust into that world. And again, the Grand Hotel, I don't think is a coincidental name. And we do see this big grand ballroom that's being held by people of high society that are using a different type of have-nots than we have seen or followed throughout the film, but as a joke and as novelty. So I think that there is a perspective that could be had in terms of looking at it that does sort of make it an easier watch. But I think that I would imagine that that's probably giving a little bit too much leniency in this particular case. I think that it probably is more of this is a thing that happened, and because it's a thing that happened, we're talking about Alfred Hitchcock and a bunch of Gaumont white rich producers who did not have the perspective or take the time to have the perspective of anything other than like, yeah, why wouldn't I show this? This is a thing that happens, and look, it's super convenient because I can paint my murderer's face black and disguise him a little bit further. It's yeah, that's I don't know. That's a really complicated answer, but that is the best I can do at this stage.
I'll tell you that I think that as it stands, with it being a thing that is there more than likely because of the convenience of the era and it being part of a at the time societal function. Again, the statement wrong then, wrong today. But what's interesting to note about it is that what's interesting is that even as a modern viewer, it does feel like, even though for me, when it does take me aback, but the focus is also on how the camera is being used to indicate the killer. So we're not like suddenly shown it. We are slowly pushing in, so we are given time to adjust to the imagery of this is what it is. And
right.
So once we close in further on him, now we're not focused so much on the blackface. We are focused on like, okay, why are we pushing in on this one particular drummer? And then we see the twitch of the eye. And so I think within that, it's a situation. I always say with films of the era, you know, it's a comfort judgment and your call to watch the film and enjoy the film or to have your opinion of it. With it being a subjective art form that we discussed. In terms of discussing this particular matter, I think that at the very least you need to address that it's there and talk about, is this part of the same discussion and debate that we are having about other films of the era of the 30s and 40s that are being properly reassessed nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I don't think that this is a sophisticated enough of a film in terms of intention, writing, or execution to think that it has earned any sort of like, oh, they were making some complicated thematic statement, or exactly. Commentary on society, or we purposefully made our villain in blackface so that you would associate blackface with villainy, as opposed to black people with villainy, which is would be a rebuttal to any sort of defense in that. But yeah, I don't think it's a sophisticated film that was trying to have any sort of conversation about this. I think that I think it was more of a lazy plot contrivance than anything else.
Yeah, and again, as we discussed up front, this film is very much a more light on its feet affair. So it's not going to be concerned with any significance within that imagery. And if you want to, I will say that if you want to elaborate further on Hitchcock and how he utilizes African American actors, one to look at his Lifeboat, when he has Canada Lee playing a significant role in the film as one of the many people on the lifeboat. He is relegated to the position of a cook, but we are not given a portrayal by Canada Lee of somebody who is of inferior stature or quality. He is allowed to speak eloquently and of a nature that puts him on the same level as the other 7 people with him on that lifeboat. So it's not. I would never pretend to assume that Hitchcock had any other had any predilection towards this imagery being something that he was a fan of. I think it is definitely something that he used to help further indicate how how our heroes are going to be thrown off by not identifying Guy right away. Now, to move it along, though, to the technical element of that shot, because it is a beautiful fucking shot, and one that is used to effect in films like Rebecca and Notorious to masterful effect. The setup of that took several hours, and it took basically the entire day to shoot that one shot. This took the entire day to shoot that one shot with everything that's involved in it, from the changing of lighting to the movement of it itself, to the choreography, to the blocking. We talk about directors who are masters at blocking in the modern context, like people like Spielberg. It's one of those things that Spielberg is known for is his blocking, and obviously he watched enough Hitchcock to know how to block a scene for what you can do with the camera, because this is an example of many times where Hitchcock's meticulous attention to detail pays off in stride. This particular shot is not as smooth or as masterful as Notorious, but it is such a great first stride for what he would end up doing down the line. Like, it's frankly remarkable that this is done in 1937 to a certain extent. It's not to say that you couldn't do it. It's amazing that it's happening in the British cinema. America makes a little more sense that they would have the technology to do that. British cinema is still not on the same level as American cinema, so their resources are probably not at the exact same level as an MGM. So the fact that they pulled this off, took a whole day to do it, probably frustrated half the crew trying to get it done, is a testament to their ability as filmmakers, hands down.
Oh yeah, very much so.
Yeah, and it's something I know as a cinematographer in the past have you know how hard it is to get off any kind of form of complicated shot, and in this particular case, I think I imagine you can't help but looking at it, regardless of the imagery we were discussing prior, to not be like, oh, Jesus Christ, like, how is this done? Because for me, it's the main reason to watch this movie, even if you're not a fan of the story, because you do need to watch that. You should watch at least the last back half of this movie and watch how he plays it out, specifically with that shot being your setup. Because what we get in the remainder of the film is then trying to identify the killer with the blinking eyes, which as the audience are made aware of is Guy, with that elaborate shot. We also see that through perspective, we see that Guy recognizes the hobo, who has found new attire, by the way. They found enough money to get him a new suit for this ball. And he recognizes him, and he starts throwing off his music. By the way, the song in that shot, No Man Can Like the Drummer Man. I like that title. No one can like the drummer man. I like that title because no one can commit a murder like the drummer man, Marshall.
I like it.
It's fun. And also the music's really good in that scene, too. It's a nice, swing era music. So he gets nervous. The band goes for a break, and he is taking some form of medication to calm down his shaking, which... To show like it's an early example of Hitchcock having the killer going into a psychotic motif. And what's funny is that as he goes along in his filmography, the killers become more subdued and able to control their anxiety. And if we're talking about this point being a little bit more on the nose, this is one where the killer's a little bit more outward. And it fits somewhat in the way you hear a radio drama, where because you only have so much amount of time, when the killer reveals himself, he gives away his entire plot or something like that. So there's a shade of that, and so he comes back out from the break, and he starts messing up the music completely in order to avoid being seen by the hobo. But Erica and Old Will cannot make a clear imagery of it. They try to dance, and they still can't identify him, primarily because Guy is hiding himself wherever he can, messing up the music. The band leader's going, "What the fuck, man? Why are you messing up my jam?" And
I was going to say, he's getting so nervous the pills are not working, and he's losing his rhythm and keeps messing up, and is sort of having a bit of an episode.
Yeah, which I think really lends to it's weird that because we haven't had this character for the majority of the movie, it's almost like we have to play catch up with his interpretation. And also his struggle or any anxiety he's been having. So we're basically being introduced to the breaking point for him. But as Erica and Old Will leave, essentially, and it's also revealed in an outside shot that Robert's just willing to give himself up because they can't make any clear identifier of what's going on. The drummer has a full-on fucking panic attack on the bandstand in what I'd argue is actually very restrained for the air. Like he faints, like he flat out faints.
Yeah, he collapses.
And the struggle to get him from point A to point B is very realistic for its time. Like it's not treated like he's like going into hysterics like an over the top Hollywood actor. So much as like he has his different form of panic attack. He doesn't go into that over the topness until the very end of his involvement in this movie.
Yeah.
Which as the police are taking Robert and taking Erica, and Erica's following with them, she notices that there's a commotion going on with the drummer. The inspector that she dealt with before in trying to revive Robert basically says like, well, remember the last time you played nursemaid, look what happened. And she points to the fact that he's having no compassion whatsoever for a human being. And she runs into the ballroom. She goes in there and she sees, and the man is blinking. And she calls in old Will, and she has them remove the blackface to reveal that it's Gus, or to reveal that it's Guy. Sorry, why did I call him Gus? And she then interrogates him. What did you do with the overcoat belt? And he just says, "I fucking strangled her." Like,
yeah,
he didn't say that exact language, but
1950s Batman character.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point where the characterization does break into technically over the top dramatic acting. But given the journey we've been on, I buy it. I'm sold on any amount of over the topness they're going to do because they've already kind of stretched their boundaries on the film. And again, it's of the era. It's not going to be perfect. They're obviously not going to get a clinical breakdown of somebody, confessing to a murder. If we're going to talk about Hitchcock's particular involvement in this, the most responsible example of it is technically Psycho at the very end when he's being comforted by the blanket when he's talking inside his head as Mother.
Yeah.
So that brings us to our conclusion of the film. And Erica then says that he thinks he should invite Robert over for dinner.
The end.
The end.
Hey, Dad, can we invite Robert over for dinner, please?
But he was technically almost a murderer. But he's innocent, and I'm young.
Yeah. Remember when he ran away from the courthouse and was a fugitive from the law?
Yeah, exactly.
And whether or not he murdered it, that was still breaking the law. Can we have him over for dinner, please?
Hey, now, Marshall, I'll if we're going to get too technical on this, just remember what Harrison Ford had to do to let people know that he did not kill his wife. And you can also remember when Tommy Lee Jones said, "I don't care."
I don't care.
I do want to watch The Fugitive again. That is a great fucking movie. I still have never seen
award-winning line right there,
dude. I've still not.
I don't care.
Yeah, I've still not seen U.S. Marshals, the sequel to that supposed sequel to that character, and I don't know if I need to.
Yeah, neither have I.
It's fun. Ryan says it's fun because Robert Downey Jr.'s in it for a minute.
No, fun.
Early Robert Downey Jr. before he cleaned himself up. This film comes out and it gets pretty moderate good reviews. Variety called it a pleasing artless vehicle for Nova Pilbaum, who was charming in her role, and the review concludes, if the pick is not Hitchcock's best effort, it is by no means unworthy of him. And the New York Times called it a crisply paced, excellently performed film. And the New Yorker wrote, though, in a contrast, that it is rather exacerbating and disappointing to me. It begins with a smart murder, but wanders off through the English rural landscape in a fashion so lacking in sound common sense, like we like in our mystery, or like to feel there is anyhow, and the interest just fades away. So, from a modern perspective, this film has 100% approval on Rotten Tomatoes, and the primary of that, arguably is also retroactive reviews, people are analyzing it for this website. And in fact,
I'm gonna go open an account and change that right.
Oh, you're the one who had to give Lady Bird that one rotten, didn't you? You jerk. But no, but it's only 18 reviews and whatnot. But like the general feel that I get out of Young and Innocent's response today is not only that it is a lighthearted affair that's entertaining enough to watch, but the sequence that we discussed near the end, where that identifying of the killer is masterfully shot, is a reason why people go back to it as an example of Hitchcock's style and technique. As a whole film, as I said up top, we don't discuss this film much beyond that one shot, and we just discussed it for 2 hours and change. So we are.
Well, I think that's because I don't think the film supports the shot. My overall takeaways from the film, I think Mary Claire does an amazing job as Erica's aunt. Edward Rigby is delightful as Old Will. There's something just like super, super warm about Percy Marmont's face, like even though he's playing the constable and the guy who's after Robert. There's just something really warm about his portrayal of that character that I quite like. But Nova Pilbeam is just amazing. She does such a good job in this film, and it's really sad that she and Hitch did not continue to work together. I know that she was in the running for Rebecca, for the lead in Rebecca, and due to sounds like several circumstances, including her like losing her contract with Galmont when it went under.
Yeah.
That I don't know, she couldn't make the crossover or something like that. But I really, really, really enjoyed her portrayal of Erica. She was a smart character, a headstrong character, and she was just really fun to watch, kind of experience the things going on in this film.
And it's interesting that this film comes as a bit of a wrap-up to the discussion of women characters in Hitchcock films. Obviously, from the very beginning of this show, we have talked about, in different forms or fashions and different guests, about various different female characters in Hitchcock movies. And the general consensus has been that he is never actively relegating them to the side. In terms of how he's representing them is, the argument is like, it's of its time. How was he expected to go above and beyond anything that he was already doing? Which arguably he does more for his female characters than most of his counterparts of the era. Unless you're dealing with somebody like George Cukor, who's a little bit more in touch with that side. Obviously you're not going to get that representation explicitly in a John Huston movie because that's not John Huston's bag. No, it's not. But, I think that if we're rounding it out with Nova Pilbeam at the very end, starting off at a point with being just the kidnapped kid in Man Who Knew Too Much, she grows into one of the most memorable characters in a Hitchcock movie because of how much time she is given, how much attention is paid to her in terms of a portrayal on screen, and how much time we are allowed to sit with her feelings and her expressions. Some of the best moments in this movie with her character are when she's not saying anything. Mm-hmm. And we are seeing the looks on her face and how she's communicating that to the different characters around her, whether it's Robert, whether it's her father, whether it's Old Will, even if it's even down to Guy at the end. She gives her own reactions. Obviously she's saying dialogue, but like in between that, you can see different parts of that. So I think that there is something to be said ultimately in terms of the legacy of Hitchcock's representation on women. Obviously, because we're talking about Golden Age Hollywood. Unfortunately, nothing's going to be perfect about this. However, it is arguable that amongst the directors that we have discussed, he has a better track record with it than others. And we talked about a few episodes back about a more than arguable misstep in it with Marnie. But it's weird that is like one major misstep out of otherwise probably close to 30 to 40 good examples of where it gets it right.
Yeah, and I don't know that I would call Marnie a misstep. I think that I don't think that Hitchcock was aware of the power of the story that he was telling and what it was going to do. I think that Hitchcock is clearly someone who is fascinated by the female experience. And I think that he has a certain amount of reverence for women. And obviously that's complicated. In his legacy and the way that he treats actresses as opposed to women as characters is often in contrast.
Yeah.
But I think that, and I don't know that it's necessarily a factor of the time that it was made in, because I just looked up. I wanted to see when the Scarlet Letter was written, and it was published in 1890, I think. And that is a film that is all about the female experience, has a female protagonist, and is about how wrong society is and how wrong it views women and their roles and things like that. So I don't think that it is quite an appropriate defense to say that, there weren't strong female leads in pop culture or in popular storytelling or anything like that. And granted, movie making is different, and the business of film is definitely a different beast than publishing companies and books. So, understood there. But I think that the thing that, especially the films that we've looked at for these podcasts, that just always strike me as interesting, I think at the very least, is Hitchcock's unwillingness to commit to these strong female characters, and in his unwillingness to lean into them, rather. Sorry, because I agree with you in terms of not only the character of Erica in this, but also the portrayal by Nova Pilbeam is amazing, and but she should have been the main character, and she wasn't. That I think that one of the things that helps me to do when I'm walking away from a film is I sort of play this game in my head, and I call it fix it or franchise it. And it's a challenge to me as a filmmaker, as a writer, as a producer, to say, if there's something wrong with it, what would I have done from a producerial standpoint to fix it? And if I really liked it, then knowing that this movie exists in the the freaking crazy machine that is Hollywood, how would I franchise it? How would I turn it into a franchise? And oftentimes that's like, how do you do that without ruining a really good film?
Yeah.
But with this, I think that so for me, my fixes to this film is right off the bat, Erica's the main character, and we start with her, and I want her to be really not respected by her family and her father in particular. I think she looks up to him. Maybe has a little bit of a wild detective hair in her. But is relegated to coffee girl around the office. Okay. And that's where you start. And then you cut to that amazing shot of the arm going through the waves in the ocean, and a body washes up on shore. And then you cut to two women walking along the beach, and they look across the shore, and there's a guy standing over this body, and he runs off.
Yeah.
And that's our entrance into the film. I think that the biggest things that hurt this film are, one, where it begins, because we know the entire film that Robert is innocent, and we need to not know that in order to care about anything. Because we're watching this character who, depending on which title you're watching, is kind of set up to be the main character. We're watching her learning to trust Robert. But as an audience, we already know that he's innocent. so we're just waiting for her to catch up with us, and that's really boring. It's not engaging. It's not driving. And then also just from a characterization standpoint, which I touched on this earlier, is he could care less about any of it. And I think that if we're watching the film from a standpoint of we're either watching everything that he's saying is we're watching a guy trying to clear his name, but in the process of clearing his name, he's getting further and further and further away from the township that's chasing him. And so it's like, is he just lying to her the whole time? And is he just trying to get away? And to have some sort of tension into it, because the dialogue is written so lighthearted in this film, and there are like weird set gags with the water fountain getting splashed in the face, and like everything dialogue and atmosphere is lighthearted. But we're talking about a woman who has died and a guy being put on trial for murder, and I do not feel the stakes of that through like 95% of the film. And so those are the big things that I think would cause a major shift in that, and that would require a thing that I think would make this movie so much better, which is shoving the character of Erica directly into that protagonist role and making her not only the protagonist but also the main character.
Yeah. So I agree with you on the level, as I've discussed earlier, about if we're analyzing and breaking this down, there is a POV situation, which Hitchcock does on a lot of his films when it comes to certain stories that he's done. And we've talked about within those films. I mean, the clearest example I think would be Rear Window, in terms of like your ultimate POV character, because that's literally the fucking movie. But you know, there's a part of it in terms of this film. If we were to really just singularly focus ourselves in her POV, it would extend beyond this thing that I'm going to read to you here in a second. But I would wrap up and say, like, it's interesting. It's almost like a Hitchcock premise that you'd want to try to remake, with that in mind. I'm not an advocate necessarily for remakes when they're not necessary. However, I'm also aware that this industry has produced great remakes, because The Maltese Falcon is one of them. The Maltese Falcon is the third time they tried to make that fucking story happen. And if you were going to remake something of Hitchcock's, you know, obviously they've done this with Rear Window a lot. And they did it with Psycho. And we all know how that turned out. But I think, like, if you were going to, like, genuinely take a plot or a story that he had done and you were going to shift anything around, this might be a good one to do it. Because you could feasibly tell the same story with the same impact, but just shift your character focus there. Shift whose story we're telling. Make it about... I would rather focus more on the innocence or the young part than the innocence part in that respect. Yeah. If we're going to go by the title. And there's something that I want to read off of the Criterion website. Criterion, by the way, has not put this out on a Blu-ray yet, and I wish they'd correct that by, you know, doing it. But there's an article here from 1988 by one Mark Fleischman. And in the article it says, at the beginning of it, it says, in Young and Innocent, Alfred Hitchcock uses all the signs in his visual vocabulary to tell one of his favorite stories, fugitive hero unjustly accused of murder. Yet this is also a story of youth and innocence triumphant, a light entertainment, a souffle made by a master chef. It's nestled between the doom-laden sabotage and the spy scenario of The Lady Vanishes, like a water pistol in a drawer full of handguns. And I think that is a very apt observation of the film, is that you are sticking this in between specifically Sabotage and The Lady Vanishes, two of which Sabotage has a bunch of heft to it. It also obviously has My Worst Mistake, but on the other hand, you have The Lady Vanishes, which is not only a heavier mystery with espionage in it, but it is also a call to a call warning to fucking Nazis are coming. So this in the middle feels weird in terms of a trajectory, and yet if you look at it as just like Hitchcock light in the way that you can look at To Catch a Thief, I think from my vantage point, you're going to find yourself enjoying this film a lot, which I do, and continue to do it. When we break down the plot, obviously, that's when we have the discussions that we had so masterfully here today with Marshall, is because that we.
And I have not seen To Catch a Thief, so I may be speaking out of turn here, but just
we all know why you haven't watched it yet.
Yeah, Paramount, get your shit together.
I wanted to let you get that out there.
Thank you. Is that I'm just going off of the title here, but it's To Catch a Thief, not to catch a murderer, and I do not have any problem with a lighthearted approach to high stakes, but if the main character / protagonist, which again, there's a protagonist problem here, so it's a little up in the air, but if the main character and the protagonist does not feel that they are under any particularly high stakes and do not care about the plot. I mean, the plot is to find this coat, and he seems largely uninterested in it. That hurts the film for me. It keeps me from being, one, invested in the plot and invested in the characters, but also it keeps me from being able to have like a good time in the lightheartedness of it, because it's just sort of like an annoyance to me. It's like, well, if they don't care about this, then why should I? And it was a really uneven watch for me, I'll be honest. Like I think that overall I feel like these two things contrasting, both the tone and then the actual like plot, make this film like really innocuous because they cancel each other out.
In a weird way, you've kind of explained why I still enjoy watching it, is because it is so quote unquote innocuous. Because it is one that it's a slick 83 minutes. I can pop it on right quick before I go to bed and get a Hitchcock mystery in me, if I so choose. Is it the one that I go back to the most, though? No, absolutely not. Obviously, there's a film that we discussed with your first time on this show that I go back to the most. But something you brought up made me realize, too, if the MacGuffin in this film, being as prevalent and on the nose as it is, and also overrepresented in the film, it almost feels like it's trying to compensate for the fact that the character of Robert, as written, doesn't care about the MacGuffin as much as he should. Because the function of the MacGuffin ultimately needs to be that the characters care a lot about it. We don't have to know what it means or how it's important. We just know that the characters want it, and so therefore we as the audience care about the characters because of them caring about the MacGuffin. Yeah,
and this is the anti-MacGuffin, because we know exactly what it is and we know exactly what it means, but the characters don't care about it.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that it's a MacGuffin situation where it doesn't mean anything to the plot, but it treads very closely to that, and that works opposite of its intention. Which it's interesting that we can end it on the MacGuffin discussion too, because it's a theme that it's MacGuffin's a word that you can throw into Hitchcock's vocabulary easily because of how it's represented in some of these masterpieces. And we're talking about a film that, while fun, does come close to breaking his rules more often than not. It's interesting how the film does is lax on his rules initially of planning the film, and I wonder if part of that is because he was becoming rather bored with it in the middle of actual production.
Well, I think that I think it might be a little bit of a chicken egg conundrum, but I would imagine that if he didn't see the issues that I'm bringing up in pre-production, that in the course of making the film, that's probably something that he absolutely recognized. And so I can totally see that causing him to sort of throw his hands up in the air and be like, well, whatever, I have it all planned out anyway. But now I don't really care about the movie anymore because it doesn't really mean anything. I mean, like if you go back and you watch it, or can hunt down the screenplay, take a look at how much exposition and what we learn about is important and what characters are going to do and what their plans are only through dialogue.
Yeah,
And
which
it is
again,
such a told film, which is
antithetical to Hitchcock's pure cinema.
exactly. And it's also it's problematic for a medium of storytelling that is visually based. That, I mean, even just like going to the aunt's house doesn't make any sense. It's absolutely stupid.
So is this the
because-
Kevin Smith of Hitchcock movies?
I don't know. It's interesting. I mean,
That is
Kevin
not
Smith
meant as
knows
a-
how to make it work. Is the thing.
This is not a dig. It's just but I thought of that and I'm like, like, but you're right.
But
you
it gets
know?
in its way because, I mean, like, if you're following the logic of the plot, I'm worried about your dad wondering where you are. So what? So he calls out and he puts an alert. He doesn't know where you're going. He doesn't know how far you are. He has no way of tracking you. So we're gonna randomly detour to the aunt's house so that you can call him, so that he will then know the vicinity of where you are. And then that doesn't even work. And it turns out the dad's worried about her and calls the cops on him anyway. So if they hadn't have gone to the aunt's house, he would have worried about them, but he now wouldn't have known where they are. And if they're looking for a guy with the raincoat because they want to prove that it still has the belt, and then they find someone with the raincoat but not the belt, who is a hobo, why do they not suspect old Will? Like, oh no, some guy gave this to me and he blinks a lot.
Yeah,
Like, it's just because we're told. Will tells us, oh no, some other guy did this. And the only reason that we go along with it as an audience is because of that opening scene. Is because we know that he's not the murderer, which again reduces the stakes and reduces like the suspense and all that kind of stuff. It's not a very well constructed film.
and hence why and hence back to the beginning of our film is that this film is light on suspense. Where there is suspense, to me, primarily lies in the climax, and it's the. What's interesting about that amazing shot in the film is that it provides the most elaborate amount of suspense setup possible for a suspense sequence that is not as suspenseful as other films he's done.
Right. But again, the problem is, and I'll speed through this, but I'll just read off the first few sentences from the Wikipedia plot on this film. On a stormy night at a retreat of the English coast, Christine Clay, a successful actress, argues passionately with her jealous ex-husband. Not accepting her Reno divorce as valid, he accuses her of having an affair. Finally, she slaps him and he leaves the room. While they'd been arguing, his eyes twitch violently. They continue to do so when, once outside, he turns angrily to look at the closed door behind him. The next morning, Robert Tisdale happens to be walking along a seaside when Christine's dead body washes ashore. What part of that says light-hearted romantic romp? Like, the story he's telling is a suspense story, and there is not a lot of suspense in it, and that is an issue.
Because I think his attention diverts to the romantic subplot, and I think that part of it is, as we discussed with adapting that novel the way they did. One of the detriments is that in order to expand out those two characters that are only in a third of the novel, that's what you use from a logic sense as filler. The problem is that it detriments the other ends of it. As I said before, the problem on this film's logic level is that the romantic subplot dampens down all the suspense we try to set up. Mm-hmm. And to the point where the romance is more important than the suspense. The moment where it comes closest to breaking that is the sequence in the Grand Hotel, but then it also it crumbles a bit under the light-hearted approach by the characters in the story to what is otherwise a scene of a guilty man breaking down in front of them.
Yeah.
What's interesting about that shot, when he's or not the shot, but the sequence when he's in the bandstand, and he's making his distractions to not be seen, it comes off not as comedic, but like it doesn't come off as serious as I think it could, and then that's where I I feel like the film's trying to like meld the two a little unsuccessfully.
Well, it's so interesting to me that because my read on that scene is not that he's trying not to be seen; it's that he's losing control of his body out of nervousness. Like I do not see that as an intentional distraction. I think he's just trying to play it cool and just trying to keep rhythm, and he's like freaking out and just like keeps doing that, and then he turns away, and that's why he goes to the xylophone. It's because he's like, I'm calling a lot of attention to myself. I need to turn my back.
Yeah. So that's part of it. The visual indicator that tells me he's trying to avoid being seen is because there is a shot where he recognizes Old Will and imagines him in his bum clothing before it dissolves back to him in the tuxedo. And
right. And I just figured that like exacerbated the panic.
Yeah, well, it definitely does. When he sees them getting up to dance, the edit suggests that he is turning at the moment when he thinks that they're going to get a good view of him. So, in a sense, I think we're both right, because he is losing control, and he is losing his ability to function, because the band leader, who is, rightfully pissed off that his musicians are fucking up his music, is turning and going, "What the fuck, bro? Like, it's jazz right now, and you're even being too improvisational for jazz." Like, so that to me kind of, again, it lends into the whole thing of like, as we've gone into this discussion to discuss the logic of this film, obviously it you go into 500 different directions with it. I guess what I would ask as part of a wrap-up with how we've elaborated it and expanded on it is, in spite of all that, obviously, we've talked about, like, which ones would you pick up and would you not pick up again. Is there something that you find good to take away from this film, from a modern lens? I'd say even beyond the crane shot that we discussed.
Yeah, again, the crane shot I think is really interesting to look at, to see. The language I used before was the film doesn't support the crane shot, because I already know that the man who blinks is the murderer and that he exists.
Right.
And that entire crane shot is constructed in a way that is like, look, everything you've been hearing this entire time is true, and here is where that person is.
And
but I already know it's true. All it's doing is revealing, oh, look, he's right here. And it would be so much more powerful with the film that supported the mystery and supported the suspense and had it up in the air about whether or not Robert's telling the truth or whether or not Old Will is telling the truth.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting to see, like, where an elaborate shot or an amazing effect can't carry a film, that it needs to fit the film that you're telling, and it needs to enhance the storytelling and be a tool of the storytelling, as opposed to be put into a place to like earn you back a lot of stuff that wasn't established earlier. But I mean, to answer your first question, I think that this is it's a well cast film. I mean, I think that, like, again, Nova Pilbaum is incredible in this. She's really she's just really magnetizing to watch. She really holds the character well and holds her place in this family and society and plot really, really well. And then just like the bit parts, I think that that's one of the things that I don't know that a lot has been written on, or if it has, I'd love to read it, about Hitchcock's ability to choose tertiary roles really, really well. But
there's a part of him that draws from the stock characters that he's allowed access to. It becomes more systematic in the American period. I should rephrase that, because it's not it's systematic throughout, but it becomes more consistent in the latter half of the British period and to the beginning of the American period. Primarily because in the American period, while there are a few that come over from the British period into his stock players, there's also a lot that he's drawing from the British actors who are already in America, or American actors that he finds that he likes reusing in these small little roles, not the least of which would be like Norman Lloyd or Hume Cronin. or Jessica Tandy. So I think that his ability to it would extend to something that we've talked about before, which is just like, if Hitchcock, it's like any director. If a director likes you, they will bring you back onto another project if they have the right role for you. It's why it's why Kevin Smith uses the same people that he uses, because he likes working with them and he can find other roles for them or write them specifically for those guys. Or Quentin Tarantino, definitely. Robert Rodriguez does it too. Like, Robert Rodriguez has put Jeff Fahey back on the map in how many ways? I mean, he made him a robot cowboy in Alita. That's how much he'll reuse him. And so, like, I think with his ability to do that, I think it is definitely a testament to where he recognizes who's fun to have aboard and who's not. He does it so much with Hume Cronyn that he brings Hume Cronyn on to do adaptations of the scripts that he's later going to have done for the films. He does the adaptation for Rope and Under Capricorn. So he's not a stranger to, finding people that he works well with. Norman Lloyd, who fell off of the Statue of Liberty and Saboteur, goes on to produce and co-run Alfred Hitchcock Presents with Joan Harrison. Hitchcock never forgot who would be good for what particular situation. The only crime he ever did was only using Nigel Bruce twice in movies. He should have used him more, because Nigel Bruce is awesome. And I say that because Sherlock Holmes movies are great. But once again, Marshall, thank you for coming down and chatting with me. And by saying coming down, I mean recording with me over the Skype, Zoom, internet sphere. I understand that it's better, obviously, when we can be in the room together. We haven't been able to be in the room together since February when we did Dial M for Murder. But you've been an indelible part of this show. You have contributed so much more than I could have ever hoped and dreamed to providing insight on Hitchcock and how we view these classic films of today. As with every guest, you have provided an invaluable asset to the show, and I'm happy that I was able to have you back to provide that invaluable insight 5 times.
Zach, thank you so much. I mean, this kind of stuff, it absolutely gives me life. Films are my literature, and I love diving into them and tearing them apart and putting them back together again. And what you are doing and have done with this podcast is absolutely incredible. Like, I think that I know that you have a lot of concern about tackling the subject of Hitchcock, which has been written about and talked about and explored and movies made about, on and on and on. But I think that I think that we have learned, and I definitely have learned in listening to the episodes, there's always something new to be gathered from it. And especially because you're a filmmaker, because I'm a filmmaker, and I know a lot of the guests that you have on are filmmakers, is that it's there's always something to learn and to be inspired by from a fellow craftsperson, from a person who, without the landscape and the vocabulary of film, would be completely different. And so it's fun to kind of go back in. And I know that I've been particularly harsh on several of Hitchcock's titles, but I think that I do that out of love and reverence, because it is really, I think it's important to take a look at something like Young and Innocent or Topaz and say, here are the kernels that are there that are really engaging and like really interesting. Like, there's something there, but man, it doesn't work. And so why doesn't it work? Because being able to approach new works and stuff that I'm working on or that other people are looking on and saying, let me just not learn how to set up suspense with the bomb under the table from Hitchcock, and let me just not learn how to weave really wry black humor into a really dark film, and let me not just learn how to set up an amazing suspense or a murder stab sequence in a shower, but let me learn like what not to do. Let me see when the master of so much of this stuff really, really, really just 100% missed the mark and got it wrong, and I can learn from that as well. And so just what you're doing with this whole podcast is just so valuable, and I can't tell you how like just truly honored I am to have been any part of it, let alone 5.
Yeah, and now granted, I don't have a 5-timers jacket to give you like SNL because I don't have Lorne Michaels' money. Yeah, like it's interesting. Like the majority of the films we have talked about together on these 5 episodes, I'm for the most part, it's no secret that I'm a much more forgiving film goer, I guess, when it comes to this. Ultimately, because I'm not. There's a part of me that understands where my ability to shut off certain parts of my brain are, and I know you have it too, obviously. As we analyze, obviously, we discuss the problems that we find, but we also talk about the things we love in it, and that's always a give and take in the compliment sandwich of any subjective art form. The key takeaway that I've had with the discussions that we've had, the Psycho discussion withstanding, is that we've talked about a lot of films that have been under-discussed or overlooked, and how that plays a part in a larger legacy. And I think it was one of the key things to talk about, because Hitchcock is more than just his successes. And part of it extended out into Marnie and talking about, like, okay, this is an artful film, an uncomfortable artful film at that. So where is it working and where is it not working? And then similarly with something like Under Capricorn, which Ryan and I talked about, from a viewership point of view, where Ryan's not a filmmaker, but Ryan, is intuitively understanding what's drawing him in and what's not. And so, or when it comes to Brad talking about The Wrong Man, and I Confess, to talk about, like, okay, like, these films were not as lauded or oversold to us. What is our takeaway on them today if I'm showing it to you having no real context for these films outside of Hitchcock directed them? And so within that, what we've been able to do, and I think even with The Young and Innocent, where I think you and I are kind of at a Topaz-esque stalemate on it, where our feelings are, because I would rewatch this film endlessly in spite of how inconsequential it is to the larger thematic legacy. What's interesting is that it's an interesting starter pack for Hitchcock. I think you could show somebody Young and Innocent and give them an example of his motifs in a way that doesn't invest like 2 hours of your time. Like, it's something that you could sit down in a film school class and show them, like, these are the high points. And then you can also talk about where the low points are in the same way. In a way, it's got the measurements of both things we've discussed on this show, whether it's the highs of Psychos or the lows of Topaz. Mm-hmm. Because it contains both. And with that, as I said before, but I'll say again, thank you for taking the time to do this. If I were to count up how many hours you talked on the show, it would fill 2 audiobooks on Audible for $14.49 a month. So, yeah, Audible, you want to sponsor this show, I'm fucking available. I just want a free Audible account. I don't care about money. But thank you again to sitting down and discussing this. And we aren't going to be done with you yet, because I'll announce it here on this particular program. The show, as it ends on the Hitchcock discussion, will be retransformed of sorts into a banner called Yesteryear Ballyhoo Review. That's REVUE. And we will be dedicated to talking about filmmakers of the Golden Age past, film stars of the Golden Age past, in this same conversational format that we have been discussing. We'll also work towards getting some commentaries and mini episodes out there, but the key thing will always be the main subject. And I'll announce it here. The main subjects for this upcoming series are going to be 2 subjects back to back. I won't tell you their names yet because I want to save that for the final episode. Although I'll tell you off mic, Marshall, because I need to get you ready. But suffice it to say, this has been a very big joy in my life, and I want to find a way to continue it, even though we may go off the air for a couple months while I get everything gathered on how to fully execute this. But on the next episode of the Shamley Silhouette, I believe we will be talking to an accomplished filmmaker and writer who will be here to talk with us about none other than Alma Revel. The Hitchcock touch had 4 hands and 2 of them were Alma's, and it's time that she got her fucking due.
Amen.
The Hitchcock impression may come and go in that episode, but we're primarily going to stick to talking about the glory that was Alma Revel. But until next time, good night.
When it comes to doing tricks with a pair of hickory sticks, I'm right here to tell you, sister, no one can like the drummer man. Every man who plays in the band is wonderful too. I've got to give credit where credit is due. But when it comes to make that music pop, make you give it all it's got, I'm right here to tell you, mister, no one can like the drummer man.